Our story begins in a palace being destroyed and burned to ashes. In the streets, workers try to flee, but they are cut down by hooded warriors who are in complete control of the situation. And while the fallen cling to their final breaths of life, the only one who seems to be putting up a fight is a long black-haired boy still standing, battling a hooded man with white hair. They are evenly matched at first, but as the seconds pass, the young man is pushed to his limits, and his mind wanders back to what it means to be part of the Ragnar clan. They are a family dedicated to protecting the empire at the northern end of the continent, acting as a wall for over 1,000 years that neither monsters nor great enemies could breach. This is all due to a special genetic makeup that grants them magic, power, resistance, and many exceptional talents. Legend says these gifts were granted by a dragon, and everyone in the family possesses these abilities, except for the one currently suffering at the hands of the hooded man. He takes a mortal wound to the abdomen, falling to the ground and bleeding out. At that moment, the man tells him it's time he learned his lesson. He says it doesn't matter how hard he tries, because there are some things he simply cannot do. He calls him a talentless wretch, yet he says it with a formal tone that surprises the boy. Confusion turns to rage when the hooded man reveals his face. It's a face he knows well. It was his friend, Rendon. The man calls the boy Theo and insists that watching him train tirelessly every morning despite his lack of talent was a pathetic experience. He even laughs in his face, admitting he never expected to meet such a pathetic Ragnar and that he should have just hidden in a corner if he wanted to live. But it gets worse when the boy tells him that he shouldn't have pretended to be his swordmaster just to sell them out to those bastards. Unfortunately, his shouts are interrupted by a new attack that severs his arm and forces him to watch as the palace is destroyed. The man insists he shouldn't shift the blame when everything is actually Theo's fault. It's his fault the palace has fallen, that the members of his house are dying, and that his mother is now a lifeless corpse. The man's cruelty is so great that he has the bodies brought over so the boy can see her firsthand. Theo is paralyzed, but just when it seems like he's about to give up, he picks up his sword and attacks again, only to be impaled by another hooded figure. This one is dressed in white, and he orders Rendon to stop talking and just finish him off already. Rendon immediately apologizes, promising he's about to finish the job. Theo watches them, unable to believe that this is his end, a pathetic death where he couldn't protect anyone. Condemned to watch his world fall apart while being completely helpless, his eyes closed by instinct, as he wonders if things would have been different if he had even a tiny bit of what he always dreamed of, that thing called talent. In the end, everything goes black, and it seems like there's nothing left until a notification window appears informing him that he has died. However, that is followed by another notification, this time stating that his trait has been activated and he will be transported to the regression point. Within seconds, his eyes open again. Curiously, the first thing he sees is Rendon himself, but not the one who betrayed his people, but his sword instructor telling him the lesson is over. Theo stands frozen, wondering if he is having a flashback of his past life. If so, it feels like a bad joke to remember the jerk who killed him, but to his surprise, another notification appears for a tutorial mission. It asks him to punch Rendon in the face. Realizing he is the only one who can see the message, he decides to just go with it and use the opportunity to let out all his frustrations before moving on to the afterlife. He drops his sword and throws a punch with all his strength. It makes a loud sound, but he soon realizes Rendon didn't even budge an inch. Worse yet, Rendon responds with a blow that sends him flying to the other side of the training ground. In a firm tone, Rendon reminds him that today's lesson is over. He says he understands Theo's frustration because the awakening ceremony is just around the corner, but he can't allow Theo to disrespect him like that. With that, Rendon leaves, and everyone around them starts mocking what happened, mentioning that even for an illegitimate son, his incompetence is absurd. The thing is, Theo couldn't care less about what they say because he is too busy touching the dirt on the ground and feeling the pain in his side. Both sensations are so realistic that it's clear to him this isn't a flashback, but that he has returned 10 years into the past, with the awakening ceremony still to come. This means he is 17 again, and the system announces that as a reward for completing the mission, the Ragnar talent is activated. Because of this, all his stats will increase at a massive speed, and a powerful energy floods his body before he reads a new message. The next mission begins, and after that, inside a main room of the Rose Palace, Rendon has a meeting with none other than Cecilia, Theo's mother. He explains to her that he has never met anyone with as little talent as Theo, but that he is willing to teach him the best he can and make him strong enough for the awakening ceremony in 5 months. With a smile, the woman accepts and hands him a bag full of money so he can continue dedicating most of his time to her son, reassuring him that she isn't worried because she believes in Theo. Unfortunately, as he leaves the hall, the jerk mutters that they should be worried. He thinks that while it's true the brat lacks talent, he is also teaching him such mediocre techniques that he will never be able to stand out as the son of a mere concubine. Of course, he thinks it's a great deal. On one hand, he has the fool giving him money every week, and on the other, that person has promised to secure his future as a reward for spying on Theo and sabotaging his growth. No matter how he looks at it, it's a win-win situation. Just then, the protagonist runs past him, heading at full speed toward his mother, whom he hugs, desperately happy to see her safe and sound after the traumatizing scene he was forced to endure in the other timeline. Being able to take refuge in her arms is the final confirmation that he has returned 10 years into the past, but now with the opportunity to protect her and change the future. And although he is still a weak underdog, if that notification window is real, he'll have the chance to get stronger, or at least strong enough to hold his own in the disgusting war for the throne that's approaching. Not only that, but he'll be able to get revenge on Rendon for making his final moments such a miserable experience. Just then, the system announces his second tutorial mission, which is to train his body to the limit. That same night, he spends hours training so his weak body can keep up with everything he has planned. Luckily, in his past life, he was part of an intelligence agency called Black Snow. He was relegated to the information team there due to his lack of skills. But thanks to that, he now has an advantage, like knowing about the existence of the Blood Sword Emperor's Elixir, a potion that strengthens the body and wasn't discovered in his other life until several years in the future. He also perfectly remembers the extreme training regimen that he could never complete before because of his lack of talent, which will now be a piece of cake. So, he runs like crazy until dawn, excited to see the mission's percentage gradually rise. He thinks he doesn't need to rest because he finally has everything he ever dreamed of within his reach. This training goes on for several days, during which he is watched with curiosity by Evelyn, the head of the 4th training camp. She can't believe he hasn't even stopped to rest for a moment, and that this boy is the talentless loser everyone talks about. As for him, when he finally reaches 97%, Theo feels like he could collapse at any moment. However, he reminds himself that this is what pushing his body to the limit is all about, and he can't stop. The previous night, he tried to take a break only to see the percentage gradually decrease with every passing second. That's exactly why he tells himself he must keep going, and he continues pushing his body to the limit, strike after strike, until the number changes from 98 to 99, and finally to 100. And with that, the system congratulates him for successfully completing the mission and announces 2 rewards. The first is the Dragon's Heart, and the second is 10 years of magic power from his past life. However, Theo can barely read the message before he passes out, using the last of his strength to accept. Oddly enough, all of his new magic power floods his body while Evelyn watches him. She drags him to one of the resting rooms, and when he wakes up, she offers him a glass of water before asking him if he's aware that opening his mana chamber before the awakening ceremony is forbidden within the clan. A confused Theo says he knows, including the consequences. What he doesn't understand is what this has to do with him, to which Evelyn explains that right before he lost consciousness, a mana wave occurred that matches the opening of a mana chamber. With that clear, she asks him again if he opened it intentionally, but Theo doesn't understand how that's possible, believing it would cost him his life. The problem is, he can actually feel the mana inside him, and then he remembers the rewards, both of which are linked to a person's mana development, especially the Dragon's Heart. This relic allows a mana chamber to open in a person's heart, which is normally impossible because human hearts are too weak for it. In fact, mana chambers are only developed in the lower abdomen for that reason, making the relic a dream item for anyone in the clan as a quick way to become overwhelmingly powerful. In his entire past life, he never knew anyone who had it, but that's changed. Now it's in his hands, a blessing that unfortunately just put him in a very awkward and dangerous situation, since Evelyn isn't just some staff member. She's a high-ranking warrior who retired after losing her left arm, and her resume includes achievements like being the commanding officer of the White Armored Dragon Cavalry. If that wasn't enough, she is known for being a person of fierce principles, who, if she finds out that he actually managed to open a mana chamber early, will report him and have him executed instantly. Because of this, he asks her if she's sure of what she saw, and if it makes sense to talk about executing him, a Ragnar heir, over a momentary feeling. He's essentially threatening her, because if he proves her suspicions are false, it could be considered a dishonor to the clan. At first, he lets her realize the stakes herself, but then reminds her that the punishment for humiliating an heir is death. He says this with such an imposing tone that she's paralyzed, and when he orders her to verify her suspicions, she obeys instantly. She places her hand on his lower abdomen and emits a wave of magic energy, which Theo's own energy should react to instantly. But to her shock, there's nothing there, which seems impossible, because she knows what she saw. Of course, it doesn't even occur to her to check for a mana chamber in his heart, since that would be impossible under the laws of nature, and Theo asks her if she's had enough. Instinctively, Evelyn kneels before him, asking him to execute her for her offense, but he can't help but smile because one of the characteristics of the Dragon's Heart is the ability to hide its mana at will, a detail that hasn't been discovered yet in this timeline. Simply put, there's no way they'll find out what he has, so he tells her not to worry, insisting she only did what she had to do. After that, he just leaves, leaving her more confused than ever, but he doesn't have time to listen to her response as he is completely overwhelmed by what these rewards mean. The fact that in this life, he can become overwhelmingly powerful. After that, a few days pass where he's forced to pretend to be weak in front of Rendon, but it's difficult once he realizes that everything the man has been teaching him is pure garbage, designed to make combat harder and prevent him from ever progressing. The thing is, as much as he wants to get rid of the bastard, that's not enough, because he needs him to find out the identity of the person in the white hood. Luckily, he realizes he doesn't need to keep playing along with those games anymore, and in a single move he breaks his sword, stating he will no longer listen to the nonsense he's trying to teach him, and even asks him how he ever became an intermediate-ranked swordsman. At this point, it's obvious the jerk was being paid to delay his growth, so he just needs to force him to quit so that he'll have to contact the mastermind behind it all to form a new plan. With that in mind, he starts to provoke him, and it works, because in Camellia Palace, a boy rushes in excitedly, informing Axiom Ragna that the bastard just challenged his instructor to a duel next week. However, he responds by smashing his glass on the boy's head, since he couldn't care less if the jerk gets killed. It turns out that guy is one of the 4 hounds of the North, and beside him, his companion Remington Narcio watches without saying a word until another man with blonde hair enters, claiming he should care because things could spiral out of control if he lets his guard down. That is Ed Troivana, one of the 9 Sky Dragons, who reminds him that the Ragnas always manage to surprise people, to which Axiom says that for that very reason, they should just let the instructor finish him off before he can become a bigger problem. And so, we move forward to on the day of the duel. Everyone gathers, eager to see Theo humiliated. As he prepares to attack, he thinks about how he didn't expect things to escalate this far, but it's too late to back down now. As if reading his mind, the system reminds him of his current mission: fight Rendon and win. But to understand how they got here, we have to go back to the argument they had a week ago. Our protagonist fired him in front of everyone, but Rendon refused, insisting he still had plenty of time left on his contract. Of course, the man could only think that if he was fired like that, his mission would end in complete failure. He tried to convince Theo to work things out, which is when the notification for the new mission first appeared. At the same time, Evelyn suggested they settle things using the Ragnar method, the law of the strongest, a fight where the winner gets the final say. Rendon immediately insisted it was a great idea, confident that Theo was too weak to even land a hit. And although Theo thought the same, knowing he's still far from surpassing him, he had no choice but to accept. Back in the present, everyone is sure they've come to witness the massacre of the weakest Ragnar. Rendon tells him that if he apologizes, he's willing to forgive his disrespect. To Rendon, it sounds like a great deal until Theo cuts him off, offering the same thing. He tells Rendon he should just accept that he's fired if he doesn't want to be humiliated in front of everyone. His confident tone is enough to spark a fire inside the swordsman. He thinks he should just end this once and for all. In fact, getting rid of the brat might be for the best, and respecting their ranks, he lets Theo attack first. Theo doesn't hesitate to lung at him, starting an exchange that surprises everyone in the crowd, because just as they expected, Rendon is completely outclassing him. Sure, Theo manages to block a few attacks, but it's clear the swordsman is stronger. This gives Rendon the confidence to lower his guard a bit, thinking that even though Theo's skills have improved, he's still just an apprentice who isn't even at the level of the 4 hounds of the North. Meanwhile, Theo can't help but remember the answer Evelyn gave him when he asked why she suggested the fight. She insisted he has to be thorough if he wants to get rid of Rendon, as he seems to have someone backing him within the clan. Naturally, Theo was stunned, wondering how she knew all that. She confessed that after the misunderstanding the other day, she noticed the nonsense Rendon was teaching him, so she decided to hire someone to investigate him. Interestingly, in the other timeline, Evelyn never realized this. Theo assumes that catching her interest with the mana chamber incident is what caused this change. However, the most interesting part is when Evelyn revealed that according to her investigation, all leads on Rendon point to the Camellia Palace. This means those bastards are sabotaging them on purpose because of the war for the throne. Even so, the protagonist admitted he still doesn't have what it takes to beat Rendon, but Evelyn just told him to stop underestimating himself. She's seen him train and trust his potential. Back in the present, those words are what motivate Theo to keep fighting. Slowly, Rendon starts to realize that something is wrong. It isn't normal for a kid to be able to block all of his attacks. Not only that, but out of nowhere, Theo even begins to press his advantage, causing an awkward silence to fall over the stands. Remington watches everything, unable to believe he is just an apprentice, while Evelyn simply smiles, remembering the offer she made him before. She had offered to train him for a week, claiming that if he followed her orders, he would be able to easily suppress Rendon. Theo couldn't help but smile at the time, thinking that it would be worth making her his ally. Of course, he asked her what she would gain from it, to which she confessed she was just paying back what she owed him. She also wanted to see his true potential to know if it was worth mentioning him to a certain friend who is obsessed with collecting great talents. Back in the battle, Rendon begins to grow desperate, asking if Theo had really been faking it this whole time. Theo takes advantage of his instability to explain that he already saw through his farce, and asks if the Camellia Palace is the one backing him. Naturally, Rendon says nothing, but the shock in his eyes is more than enough to confirm that Evelyn was right. Then, with a single movement, Theo severs his arm, decorating the arena floor with a trail of blood. At that moment, the entire place falls silent, and the only thing that can be heard are the screams of the man asking how he dares. But Theo isn't listening. This is the definitive confirmation that he has become stronger, and more importantly, that he can keep growing. With that in mind, he slowly approaches until he is standing in front of him. He repeats the same words Rendon told him in the other timeline, that the reason things turned out this way is entirely his own fault, since he is about to die simply for being the weakest. Even though Rendon desperately screams for him to wait, Theo doesn't listen, and a second later, the man's head goes flying through the air. Meanwhile, the reactions from the audience are as varied as you'd expect. Some are amazed while Evelyn watches with the confidence of someone who already knew what would happen, and a mysterious man smiles excitedly at such potential. On the other hand, the system congratulates him for completing the mission and grants him 2 additional rewards. First, the observation skill, and second, an entire year's worth of magic power. But Theo's mind is elsewhere, as he can't help but regret how weak he was in his past life, allowing someone as pathetic as the man lying at his feet to ruin his life. However, everything else fades into the background when suddenly, the same mysterious man from before jumps down beside him. The mere impact of his feet hitting the ground is enough to shatter the arena into 1,000 pieces. The man begins to shout his name, and when our protagonist turns around, he recognizes him as Julius Ragnar, also known as the Demon Dragon, is the commander of the White Armor Dragon Cavalry. He's so powerful that his presence completely rattles Theo, who wonders how he got there and how long he'd been watching the fight. The rest of the audience feels the same way, including Evelyn herself, who wonders if he couldn't have made a quieter entrance. To make matters worse, he approaches Theo with murderous intent, and Theo knows better than anyone that he doesn't stand a chance. So he braces himself for the impact, only to be shocked when Julius starts laughing and congratulating him. He mentions that although it was a bit disrespectful to kill him, he probably deserved it, and as expected, Theo just stands there, speechless. But the real surprise comes when Julius tells him that none of that matters, because what he really wants is for him to join the White Armor Dragons, leaving everyone stunned, including Remington, who can't help but comment that this is the first time in history that an apprentice has been recruited without even going through the awakening ceremony. That's because it's impossible to measure someone's true potential while their mana chamber is closed. In short, recruiting someone like that is a risk, and the fact that Julius is willing to take it means he sees Theo as having superhuman potential. However, to everyone's surprise, Theo calmly refuses the offer, leaving Julius frozen in place, not knowing what to do or say next. Of course, he's not the only one shocked, and over the next few days, Theo's refusal becomes the main topic of conversation. With the story slowly changing until many assume he was only able to defeat his teacher because the man was a weakling, and so on. The news reaches a blue-haired girl in the middle of her training, surrounded by a group of tattooed men who can't believe a humble Ragnar exists. And of course at the Camellia Palace, where Imo Ragnar, the lady of the Camellia Palace, admits that this complicates things. Just then, someone tells her she has nothing to worry about since Rendon was replaceable. But she says losing that pawn isn't what worries her, it's the fact that he caught Julius's attention. We see she's talking to her brother Edu, explaining that Evelyn has stuck her nose into the matter, which will ruin their plan to take control of the Rose Palace. Axion then enters the room, insisting that as long as the clan head doesn't find out, they can do whatever they want. In fact, they should take this opportunity to get to work, because there's no way Theo could have changed that much in such a short time. It turns out Axion is Emil's son, and he tells her he'll just play with the bastard for a bit to make him understand his place. Meanwhile, Theo continues training with Evelyn, and when they finish, she asks why he turned down the offer, to which he thinks it would have been foolish to ally with Julius so soon and believe all those offers about the incredible rewards he'll receive after finishing first in the awakening ceremony. He doesn't mention that part, insisting instead that he isn't strong enough for something like that yet and prefers to focus on his growth. It was a calculated response based on what he knew she wanted to hear, thanks to his observation skill. However, they are interrupted by a guy named Sybil, who insists on speaking with him. He gives off such an intimidating aura that Theo uses observation on him, only to be surprised that he isn't what he seems. He isn't just some fool who admires him, he's dying to train with him. Just then, a new mission arrives: discard the title of Ragnar the Fool. To be honest, I'm not sure what it means, but Sybil soon shows his true colors, admitting he always saw Theo as a good-for-nothing, until he realized Theo trained harder than anyone else, and now he admires him. Of course, he also saw the display the other day. Not just his strength, but his honor inspired him not to give up, so he asked for the chance to fight him one-on-one. Normally, Theo would doubt his intentions, but observation makes it clear he's being genuine. This still surprises Theo, as he was sure that showing off his strength would only gain him enemies, not admirers. Fortunately, this is the perfect opportunity to start building a group of loyal followers, people who will help him with his plans to become the next clan leader. So he accepts, realizing the mission is about building a new image for himself and leaving behind the title of Ragnar the Fool, as he moves toward a new stage in life. With that in mind, he asks Evelyn for permission to use the arena, and she agrees. That's the final push he needs to take a battle stance and formally introduce himself to his opponent. Sybil gets the message instantly and does the same, saying he hopes they can have a great fight. And so, the battle begins with Sybil launching a powerful and extremely fast offensive, his specialty in his generation. When Theo blocks him without hesitation, the boy is amazed, realizing Theo is no fraud and that his sword skills are the real deal. This only gets him more excited. As for our protagonist, he can't believe the guy is foolish enough to fight with so many openings. He sends him flying with a single blow, thinking that despite Sybil's agility, he's nothing compared to him. Once on the ground, Sybil accepts defeat and thanks him. Theo says goodbye and returns to his stand. However, things get interesting when he sees his reflection in the blade of his sword. He wonders if he can use observation on himself and is shocked to find that it works. Unlike with others, he can see much more interesting data, like his stat. Furthermore, this includes a bunch of abilities categorized as talents, where the observation skill comes in. This implies that if he keeps completing missions, he'll be able to obtain up to 4 more of those. The strange part happens when he takes a more detailed look at his stats and notices that he has -49 luck, making him wonder if he's cursed or something similar, and if that's why his life was so miserable in the other timeline. Just then, he realizes that they aren't alone, as more apprentices have gathered around the arena to watch him, considering the law of the strongest that rules his family. Even Evelyn thinks all those kids can only have 2 reasons for being there. They either admire him or they're dying of envy. Luckily, when he looks at their faces, he discovers it's the former, as they're smiling excitedly, wondering what they need to do to become that strong, repeatedly saying they want to fight him too. Among all the boys, Theo chooses one named Eode, who isn't an apprentice, but an intermediate-level warrior, so he calls him to the battlefield. After the proper introductions, they begin to fight, presenting a greater threat that the system automatically recognizes, and even his basic swordsmanship skills begin to increase. This time, Eode not only withstands several hits, but counterattacks with such ferocity that he was about to land a direct blow to the neck when Theo deflects the sword and disarms him in a single move. However, that's not the end of it, because the interesting part comes when the system announces that by gaining Eode's approval, his luck increased by 1 point, which means this is the path to changing his destiny once and for all. And so, he spends the rest of the afternoon fighting everyone else, and for each one he defeats fairly, his luck increases until no one is left standing. The problem is that although his stats are improving, the mission progress for being seen as a fool isn't doing as well, increasing by only 1%, which makes no sense until he realizes that everyone there already approves of him. So now the plan is to fight stronger rivals or people who despise him. And luckily, that opportunity doesn't take long to arrive, as Remington himself appears right then, whom everyone recognizes as one of the 4 Hounds of the North, the strongest rookies who promise to stand out like no one else in the upcoming awakening ceremony. Without wasting time, Theo analyzes him, discovering that although he has no ill intentions, he's genuinely surprised by the appearance of a rival no one expected. He introduces himself politely as part of the Narcio clan. In response, Theo acts just as polite, explaining that he is the 31st son of the great guardian of the North, Killer Ragnar, and to him, it is a genuine honor to be able to cross swords with a prodigy of his level. In his past life, it would have never even crossed his mind to face him in a duel of equals. So while he doubts he has what it takes to defeat him in his current state, there's only one way to find out. And with that, there's a powerful clash of swords, which ends with Theo's weapon completely shattered. This can only mean one thing: he lost, and just like that, it's over in an instant, which surprises some while others insist the result was obvious. No matter how much he's evolved, he still doesn't have what it takes to defeat one of the 4 Hounds, and Theo knows it himself. So he doesn't hesitate to admit defeat, to which Remington responds by pointing out that Theo's sword was already worn out and that he was exhausted, so he takes his hand as a sign of respect, hoping they can have a proper duel next time. The fact that he sees him as an equal makes everyone present excited, and the mission status increases by 35%, confirming the theory that not everyone's approval is worth the same. However, Theo is more focused on the fact that that simple clash was enough to make it clear that he still has a long way to go. He's stronger than he's ever been, and yet it's still not enough. That also means he needs to find new ways to improve, and he wonders what other scenarios besides duels are good for gaining people's approval. Then Remington confesses that he didn't come just to have a duel with him, and he hands him a letter, revealing his true intentions are to invite him to the Society of the Scaled Dragon. The tension in the place immediately spikes, as this is a high society group that only a few select people can join. Because of that, Theo asks if it's really okay to invite someone like him. But the white-haired man insists he's more than qualified, and that the group isn't as serious as everyone makes it out to be. According to him, it's just a social group for peers from the upcoming awakening ceremony. But it's obvious he's being very humble, since Theo knows that place isn't about making friends but about proving strength, and it's full of people who look down on him. Luckily, it's the perfect environment to progress in the mission, and since the group is led by Axion, it will also allow him to do some reconnaissance at the Camellia Palace. With that in mind, he accepts, and the percentage automatically increases to 36%, a sign that it was the right decision. Finally, Remington says goodbye, explaining that the next meeting will be in 2 weeks, and Evelyn watches them with curiosity, wondering what the protagonist is up to. After that, at the Rose Palace, Theo is greeted by his mother, who already heard the news and sees him as it was a perfect opportunity to show the clever Emil what they were made of. He might even catch the council's attention, so she calls in a group of servants who surround him with fabrics and measuring tapes to perfect every minor detail of his appearance. She's confident in his manners, but sees this as the perfect chance to help him make a good impression using her skills as a former actress. Honestly, his mother is adorable, but Theo knows all of this means much more to her than to him. For her whole life, she felt guilty for being a commoner concubine and for him being looked down upon because of her. It didn't help that he turned out to be weak, even weaker than all the other Ragnar children. So it's no surprise that his overwhelming mother hugs him, reminding him over and over that she believes in him and that he can do this. Luckily, Theo finally has the confidence to assure her that she doesn't need to worry about him anymore. He'll achieve all of that and more. And so, 2 weeks later, on the night of the banquet, Remington comes to the palace to pick him up, and Theo steps out looking sharp, while his mother and the servants cheer him on, encouraging him in the most adorable way. Even Remington can't help but tell him he looks incredible. It's not just the outfit, he's also grown taller and more muscular thanks to the intense training over the last few weeks. During that time, Remington also practiced every day, and they became closer as he encouraged Theo to be kind to his fans, who also showed up to train more motivated than ever. In the end, Evelyn finished with a squad at her disposal to help her get stronger. Back in the present, Remington tells him there's no need to worry, because the banquet will be a fairly normal event. Though he does warn him about one thing. His friend Axion can be quite a handful, so he asks Theo to be patient with him. The interesting part is when he mentions that it was actually Axion's idea to invite him into society in the first place, insisting that he wanted to meet him. He even prepared this banquet just for him. At first glance, it might sound like a kind gesture, but Theo knows better, and he's sure the jerk's plan is likely to humiliate him. Still, he doesn't let that intimidate him, and the journey continues normally until they reach the grand entrance of the Camellia Palace. This is the place that houses the people who hired Rendon to sabotage him, and the ones who in the other timeline eventually burned the palace to ashes. Because of that, Theo stares at the place with interest, while Remington urges him to keep moving, explaining that Axion plans to greet him personally. Remington sounds very excited for them to meet, but the protagonist knows Axion's real plan is to remind him of his place as the most useless Ragnar. Luckily, he came with a plan. However, his attention shifts when he notices a powerful light shines from one of the windows, the same light emitted by system notifications. Because of that, he doesn't notice that someone threw a sack of flour at him, and although he dodges it easily, Remington gets quite upset, since the poor guy had no idea they were going to be greeted that way. Looking up, he sees the prank was played by another group of idiots from the palace, who mock Theo from a distance, insisting it's just a greeting among friends. Honestly, our protagonist couldn't care less about that nonsense, but Remington explodes in anger, demanding an explanation, until Axion emerges from the group, smiling confidently as he claims he doesn't understand why he's so upset. And right then, the protagonist analyzes him, discovering his main traits are madness, psychopathy, and talent with the sword, along with the fact that he's happy to have found a new toy to play with. Naturally, he can assume that toy is him, and out of nowhere, he simply thanks him, surprising everyone. Theo insists that such a welcome means he already considers him a friend, to which Axion responds that he has become quite entertaining since the last time they met. After that, we move inside the party where the conversation revolves around the decision to invite Theo, since it doesn't matter if he's also from the direct line or not, he doesn't have what it takes to belong with them. The worst part is that they don't hide their comments at all, and Remington apologizes for it, but the protagonist doesn't mind because the more they look down on him, the more his recognition will grow when he gets the chance to crush them. At that moment, what matters most to him is finding where the quest light came from. However, he knows he doesn't have an excuse to wander through the rooms yet. Finally, Axion appears, and just as planned, the protagonist thanks him for the invitation, acting relaxed despite the psychopath's threats. Not only that, but he insists he knows that earlier was just a greeting, although in that last part, his tone was somewhat threatening too. But no one notices, and the other idiots assume he's just being a lapdog. Among their comments, they mention his mother, a simple actress, could never compare to Emil of the Troivana clan from the east. However, things get interesting when they say they don't understand why Remington pities him so much, until they remember that apparently Remington is also illegitimate, a sensitive topic that completely changes the energy in the room. Of course, Remington hears all of this, and although Theo's plan was to play dumb for a bit longer, he takes it as a sign to move forward with his plan. So without hesitation, he states that he also wants to greet his new friends. And with an eerie calmness, he approaches one of them and smashes a wine bottle over his head. As he recovers from the blow, the scoundrel has the nerve to ask how he dares to hit him. But Theo doesn't even listen and responds with a kick that sends him flying across the room. He insists it was just a small greeting. The mission percentage immediately jumps to 43%. In total shock, Remington wonders why he did it. The interesting thing is that this is only the beginning. Theo grabs the man's arm and breaks it, telling him to consider it a farewell. By the end of the beating, the mission progress is at an impressive 66%, and even Axion is left speechless. Theo looks at the others with contempt, asking if anyone else wants to come up and say hello. He's instantly surrounded by 4 guards who don't hesitate to draw their swords and press the tips against his neck. They claim that the sin of harming the young master of the Hanabi clan is punishable by death. Yet Theo doesn't even flinch, as this is exactly why he came to this nest of enemies. Everyone here expected to just watch his downfall, but he's going to give them a much more interesting show. And with that in mind, he reminds them that the Hanabi are vassals of the Ragnars, meaning they have no right to complain. Not only that, but he begins to release an energy that leaves the guards completely paralyzed. They can't move or say a word, only wondering if this is really the Ragnar failure everyone knows. Thinking it over, they remember he also has a right to the throne as the direct bloodline of Killer Ragnar, the great lord who rules over the 6 snow clans of the north. Threatening the life of that dragon's blood is such a huge sin that he could easily demand the destruction of their entire clan. In the past, people got away with trampling over him, but those days are over. Before the poor guards can even apologize, he orders them to be killed. A second later, their heads fall to the floor. It all happens so fast that the percentage shoots up to 70%, and we see that the one responsible was none other than Evelyn, who had been following him in secret from the very beginning. The funny thing is, her arrival wasn't something Theo planned or anything like that. In reality, he was just lucky enough to notice her presence in time, and thanks to her, he was able to turn the situation around much more effectively than if he were alone. As for why she decided to follow him, for that we have to go back to a meeting between her and her best friend, Julius, who teased her by reminding her that she had always refused to take on new disciples. After trying to dodge the subject for a bit, Evelyn confessed that the brat turned out to be far beyond her expectations. In fact, considering just his attitude and talent, he's the best among those she's ever taught. And surprisingly, that includes Axion. She insisted his potential even exceeds that of the prodigy. Overall, Julius agreed with her words. But what neither of them understands is why Theo decided to hide his true strength all this time. In their minds, they can't grasp the possibility that he simply changed overnight. However, Evelyn confessed she was worried about the whole business with the Scaled Dragon Society, so Julius was the one who suggested she follow him. He had no doubt that Axion and the rest of the wolves were eager to spill some blood, so it would be a good idea to protect her pup. Not only that, but he took the opportunity to ask her to help convince Theo to join the White Armor Dragons, as he'll be waiting for both of them in their ranks. Back in the present, Evelyn recognizes that the kid orchestrated this situation on purpose because he knew she would back him up, but what she didn't understand was when or how he realized she was following him. She was genuinely impressed by that. Meanwhile, Theo thinks it wasn't that hard to notice her, since the dragon heart also comes with a sort of sixth sense that helped him notice details like that. However, the madness isn't over yet, and he states out loud that most of the people there have disrespected a successor candidate, asking what the punishment for such a crime is. Without hesitation, Evelyn says that the guilty parties are subject to immediate execution, but he tells them he's feeling benevolent and that an arm will suffice. And just like that, the carnage begins. One by one, the arms of all those high-ranking nobles begin to fall in a bloody festival of screams, wailing, and pleas from Axion's little friends, whom Theo blatantly ignores, not caring what happens to them. In fact, he keeps the game going, claiming that this was only a greeting. And once the last arm is cut, Evelyn stands face to face with him, greeting him politely. As if nothing had happened, and Axiom realizes that he only cut off the arms of those who made comments about Theo's lineage. It was a clever and justified move that even he, another successor candidate, couldn't question, especially since if they go to a priest right now, they could probably even have them reattached. Furthermore, he has no doubt that Evelyn and Remington see him as an ally, recognizing that Theo and the Rose Palace have truly decided to change the game. The idea is so exciting that it makes him want to crush Theo with his own hands, but he says nothing more. At that point, our protagonist tells Remington and Evelyn that it's time to leave, and they walk toward the exit. Before leaving, he takes Axiom by the arm, thanking him because he really had a good time. At that moment, the progress bar reaches 100%, and the system announces that he has successfully completed the mission. It states that all tutorial missions are now finished, and that from now on no one else will dare call him the idiot Ragnar. They make a cool exit from the place, keeping in mind that his true revenge is only beginning. At the same time, the system announces that his reward will be an experience elixir. But all of that takes a backseat when Emil and Ed receive the news of what happened at the party, specifically that the downfall of Axiom's Scaled Dragon Society was caused by Theo Ragnar. Naturally, the news quickly reaches everyone else, including Sybil, who celebrates the victory as if it were her own along with the rest of her friends. After that, things get complicated at the Camellia Palace, where Emil greets Axiom with a slap to the face. He didn't just give Theo a perfect justification for his actions, but because of him, their allies are now useless. This is why they had asked him not to take things lightly. In his eagerness to pressure Theo into submitting, he only gave him a reason to become more aggressive and ruin their plans to take over the Rose Palace. Savages and ruining their plans to seize the Rose Palace. Axiom immediately tries to explain himself, but she ignores him and sends him to his room to reflect on what he did. Once she is alone, she mentions she doesn't know where he got such an explosive temper, to which Ed, who had been listening from the shadows, says he's just like she was when she was younger. Surprisingly, he adds that the incident isn't as bad as it seems, as they can use Theo's attack as an excuse to suppress him. If all goes well, they can get the clan leader to withdraw support from the Rose Palace. While it sounds difficult, Emil thinks it makes perfect sense. The main reason they wanted to keep Theo weak was to avoid the clan leader paying any attention to the Rose Palace while they got rid of them. However, they now have the perfect excuse to proceed legally, to the point where he'll have no choice but to submit to the Troivans. So with a smile, she asks how long it will take to prepare everything, but Ed surprises her by saying that he's already finished with the preparations, and she will see the results tomorrow. Things take a strange turn when he hugs her and tells her to relax, and she confesses that it's because of moments like this that she can't help but love him. That's right, these two are siblings in every sense of the word. Meanwhile, back at the meeting between the protagonist and his companions, Remington apologizes for not doing anything to defend him from the insults, while Theo didn't hesitate for a second to respond when they started offending Remington. His words reflect great admiration, and as usual, he isn't lying, as he thinks to himself that Theo is truly impressive. He admires how Theo didn't hesitate to stand up to action, even knowing that in a physical fight, he would likely lose. In his mind, Theo did it all for him, and despite his clan ordering him to befriend Action, he wants to repay Theo instead. So, with the others as witnesses, he declares that from now on, he will follow Theo faithfully. Theo tries to clear up the misunderstanding, but Evelyn uses telepathy to advise him to just let it be and enjoy it. Even if he didn't do it with those intentions, Remington appreciates what he did and simply wants to be his friend. In the end, the protagonist accepts, but he can't help feeling a bit guilty. He feels the system has given him an unfair advantage, since when everything started, he thought these were just fragments of his regret materializing. However, now he has no doubt about what they are, and so the story continues, that this is real and it's his duty to make the most of it. Then he discovers that he's leveled up, which gives him a set of stat points that he can use to increase his stats however he likes. This cheers him up and he returns to his usual self as he prepares for the counterattack from the Camellia Palace. Because of this, he asked Remington to help him with what's coming next, thinking that in the future, he will become the leader of the Narcio clan, with forces so massive and powerful that they could challenge the Ragnars. In other words, this is his chance to get him 100% on his side, and he does this by handing him a note explaining everything he needs to do. Remington accepts with a smile just in time, because at that moment a group of knights known as the King's Swords enter to arrest our protagonist for assault threats and intimidation. Not only that, but it's a royal order issued only minutes ago, so he just goes along with it, asking the others not to panic. As he leaves, he glances at Remington with a cheeky smile that invites him to read the note, making it clear that he already knew what was coming and was more than prepared. However, the one who wasn't prepared was his mother, who wakes up to the news that her son is being taken to court, where the members of the Dragon Society and Kamado plan to accuse him of nothing less than inciting a rebellion. Her assistant immediately explains that the situation is very serious and that it's almost certain he'll go to trial, which almost gives her a heart attack. But then she remembers that her son can handle this and more, as he's not the type to give up over something like this, and all that's left to do is support him. As for Teo, he takes the opportunity to rest a bit in the carriage, and when he opens his eyes, he is greeted by the imposing sight of the court, a terrifying place he knew from his past life. It definitely doesn't bring back good memories, especially since he knows this won't end with a simple imprisonment. No. The people from the Camellia Palace will go all out, and that means a trial where they'll try to question how qualified he is to stay in the line of succession. What's more, he can be sure they'll take the opportunity to completely crush him once and for all, which would be terrifying if he hadn't already expected it. The guards escort him directly to the audience hall, where a group of people as impressive as they are dangerous are already waiting for him. Among them are Julius the Demonic Dragon, Ed the Celestial Dragon, Osa Ragnar the Sword Dragon, who is the head of the Central Intelligence Department, Wolfgar Ragnar, the Lady of the Flower Palace, and the Elder Dragon and leader of the Council, whom Theo greets as if they were lifelong friends. He doesn't do this because they're close, but because he knows the leader is a man who deeply values lineage. These elders despise boys like him, the children of common women, to the point that the leader doesn't even bother to hide his disgust. Because of this, he gets straight to the point, explaining that the families of the boys whose arms Theo cut off are threatening to cut ties with the main family. At first, he seems composed until he starts insulting Theo for causing this as a mere bastard. None of those present expected Theo to calmly admit he was far too careless, only to follow up by saying he should have just cut off their heads instead. He argues that since those boys come from families vassal to the Ragnars, yet still dared to threaten him with death and question his lineage, the principles of chivalry are clearly dead. As a result, he claims he couldn't just stand by while the honor of the Ragnars was trampled on. He says this with such confidence that Julius is impressed. The old man thinks it's nonsense, while Osa concedes that, in theory, he is right. However, the Ragnars must also listen to the voices of their vassals and knights, rather than ruling the world through tyranny alone. Theo immediately replies that he will take that into account, as this woman is not only the leader's first wife, but the best swordswoman in the north, a powerful person he cannot afford to have as an enemy. The old man then proposes a punishment of 3 months probation, which will prevent him from participating in this year's ceremony. However, he clarifies that Theo will be welcome next year, along with the boys he injured. Overall, it's not a bad deal, and although it's not exactly what Ed wanted, he smiles. In the family, delaying the ceremony is considered a dishonor, which in the long run gives him an excuse to take control of the Rose Palace. The problem is that, out of nowhere, Theo announces he wants to appeal, surprising everyone. Ed's smile grows even wider, believing that whatever happens next will ruin Theo. Why? Because within the Ragnar clan, where strength is the priority, and appeal means war, where the winner is the one who is right. The system then announces that he has entered the main advancement path, and the first mission is the path of the successor. Meanwhile, we see the hidden northern branch of the series Merchant Guild, whose base is being completely destroyed by Remington and Evelyn. After eliminating everyone following Theo's orders, they claim that the Triobani family's Camellia Palace will be finished after this. Back at the trial, the Elder asks Theo if he's sure about what he's doing, as there's no way he can face the forces of 15 entire clans alone. However, Theo tells him not to worry about that, and that due to the clear difference in power, it's obvious he won't be facing them all at once. They must find an alternative to make the battle as fair as possible, which means that each clan will have to send a representative, and the final winner will be decided in a one-on-one sword duel. But Julius thinks that since the complaint was made on behalf of the Scaled Dragon Society, it would be most sensible to choose Axion to face Theo. The problem is that in that scenario, the protagonist can't win, and Julius wonders if he has a plan up his sleeve, or if he's foolish enough to think he or Evelyn would stick their necks out for him. However, Theo simply insists that according to the laws, they must choose representatives and hold the battle within a week. At this, Ed begins to gloat over his victory as he reaches the same conclusion as Julius and is certain that against Axion, Theo doesn't stand a chance. With that moment in mind, he accepts and is about to propose his nephew as the representative when an imposing voice fills the room, mentioning that he thought he was a quiet child. That voice leaves everyone paralyzed, and suddenly, the large door behind Theo opens, revealing none other than Kyle Ragnar, the clan leader and his father, who admits that the boy is quite good at making clever plans, and in less than a second, everyone kneels and shows their proper respect. But the most interesting part is that right then, the protagonist receives his next mission, to take the Camellia Palace and discover its great secret, remembering the mysterious light he saw once before, which is definitely related to the system. However, the protagonist knows it's not the time to think about that, as he first has to deal with his father, a variable he hadn't considered, and one that could definitively ruin his plans. Just then, Kyle Ragnar walks toward him and asks him to stand, revealing he is aware of the situation, and that it will be quite difficult for him to enter the power struggle on his own. That's why he asks who he was planning to select as his representative. It sounds like a casual question, but it's a test, and Theo replies that he planned to fight himself, as he doubts anyone else is willing to sacrifice themselves, and even if he loses, at least he won't back down from something he considers unfair. His words thrill the leader so much that he starts laughing like a madman, as that mindset is what characterizes the Ragnar clan, and it's the bare minimum he would expect from one of his sons. Without wasting time, Theo thanks him for his kind words, but in his mind, he thinks it's a mistake to believe he's actually fighting this power struggle. It's nothing more than bait, as his real plan is being carried out by Evelyn and Remington at that very moment, finding definitive proof of the treacherous conspiracy of the Camellia Palace against him. If he gets that, victory will be his without him lifting a finger. So he's shocked when his father declares that he wants to give him a chance, the chance to see if he can withstand one of his attacks. If he succeeds, he will clear him of all charges. But just as he was about to take him to a suitable area, he's interrupted by Ed, who is unable to hide his frustration, knowing that if the brat survives, he'll earn the leader's full approval, and by extension, the clan's. Of course, Ed really doubts he'll survive, but the odds are never zero. So he insists that a trial by combat is the best way to put the vassals in their place for their insults, to which the leader tells him to shut his mouth, reminding him that he's a vassal too, and can be put in his place whenever he chooses. He then asks Julius what he's laughing at, since he's been snickering for a while, and Julius says it's been a long time since he's seen the leader take such an interest. In the end, Theo admits that although his initial plan fell apart, this actually works in his favor, so he puts on a humble act before accepting, on the condition that since the trial has become much stricter, his compensation for passing should increase. In other words, if he survives, he wants more than just absolution. He wants the Camellia Palace. Immediately, Ed starts foaming at the mouth with rage, and the old man thinks the brat has lost his mind, daring to propose a deal to the leader without knowing his place. But the irony is that his father accepts, stating that if he wants to aim to be the successor, he'll need at least that level of determination. Furthermore, seeing Ed's reaction, he asks if he has a problem with the decision, but Ed has no choice but to say no, and he's even put in charge of setting the stage for the big trial. And so minutes later, they both stand facing each other in the great arena, with the council members serving as witnesses. Some are curious, others are worried, and Ed is mortified to see how the trap he set to make Theo look bad has turned into a podium to elevate him. Even so, Ed tells himself over and over that there's no way he can survive a single blow from the leader and he'll likely die right there. Theo thinks so too, which is why he makes sure to secretly drink the elixir from the last reward, whose effect is so significant that his father notices a slight improvement, though he assumes it's just due to his status as a Ragnar. Either way, the man insists they begin, making it clear he'll use a rusty sword instead of his actual weapon to keep things fair. The problem is that even that isn't enough to make much of a difference, because the moment he activates his fighting spirit, the amount of energy and pressure in the room is so intense that our protagonist begins to tremble. Luckily, he manages to stay on his feet, which impresses his father, who expected to see him on the floor writhing in pain. However, it's no coincidence, as Theo thinks about how the experience elixir increased his level by 5 points, giving him several stat points that he applied only to strength. In short, his strength has tripled compared to what it was a couple of hours ago, enough for him to even lift his sword and take a defensive stance. He might still be light years away from his father, but with this strength, he should be able to block at least one of his attacks, and he's betting everything on it. Even when his opponent finally attacks, generating so much energy that the ground beneath them shatters into 1,000 pieces, and the slash rushes toward him with the intensity of a natural disaster, the unexpected happens. He succeeds even though his sword is completely destroyed in the process. His father smiles, claiming it's been a while since he's found a decent son. However, that's not all he has to say. In front of the council, he declares that Theo has proven his innocence through his iron will, meaning the trial is over. Just then, the system announces he has successfully completed the mission, earning the rewards for surviving a hit from Killer Ragnar, the inventory function, and a mysterious blue key. After that, our protagonist faints. The next thing we see is him waking up in a large room with his mother, who is so worried that she starts rambling like crazy, until Julius enters and explains that the former lady of the Camellia Palace, Axion and Ed, have all been kicked out. This means he's now in charge of the Camellia Palace. The system announces that the scenario has updated, and he's completed the first part of the successor's path, taking control of the Camellia Palace. For now, all that's left is to discover the great secret hidden within these halls. Meanwhile, Amir is forcibly evicted, and Ed turns to Axion, ordering him to kill Theo Ragnar. The boy says he plans to rip his arm off during the awakening ceremony, but the man stops him, saying that won't be enough. He has to take his head. Later, the protagonist walks through the palace, thinking things took a very different turn than he planned. Of course, he's not complaining, as this is much better. He pulls an apple out of his inventory, unable to believe something so convenient actually exists. No matter how much he tries to make sense of it, he can't, but he's determined to make the most of it, as well as the blue key. Based on his observation, it's used to open a specific dungeon located inside the Camellia Palace. Just then, he finds that mysterious light from the other day, a door with a magical blue lock. This is only the beginning, as Theo takes the key from his inventory and uses it to open the door. What's waiting on the other side isn't a normal room, but literally a massive cave that the system identifies as a dungeon. Because of this, any experience he gains inside will be doubled as a reward. This is more than enough incentive for our protagonist to head inside, even if he doesn't know what's waiting for him. Of course, he first makes sure to fill his inventory with enough weapons to handle any trouble that might come his way. With that settled, he begins his new adventure, where everything is fairly peaceful until he comes face to face with a wolf so large it looks like some kind of demonic beast. It looks incredibly dangerous, so he lunges at it to finish it off, using his shield to protect himself from the creature's sharp teeth while striking back with his sword. He figures that if he survived a hit from his father, a simple wolf shouldn't be a problem. However, the combination of thick fur and quick movements makes it a difficult enemy that he can't defeat with half-hearted attacks. In fact, as the seconds go by, it becomes clear that he shouldn't underestimate it. He starts to take the fight a bit more seriously, focusing on trying to replicate the beam of light he saw when he faced his father's attack, that imposing and splendid arc of pure power. And after several failed attempts, he discovers that the key might be to give everything in a single movement, as if this last attack were the only one he could make in the entire battle. With that in mind, he sets his shield aside to focus on one final strike, a slash so powerful and precise that he manages to drive his sword right into the beast's eye. Even so, that isn't enough to defeat it, and angrier than ever, the wolf lunges at him. But before we see how it ends, we jump ahead 2 months. Sybil and the others mention that after word spread about Theo and his father, more people arrived daily hoping for a chance to fight or at least train with him. However, during all that time, Theo never returned to the training grounds. A man named Henry Morris, an apprentice from the Flower Palace, asks where he is, insinuating that he's a coward and that the story of him surviving a hit from the clan leader is a lie. Not only that, but the guy even insists that what happened with the Dragon Society and Amato must be a total fabrication, at which point Sybil interrupts him, knocking him to the ground with a single punch to the face. Based on the expressions of the others, none of them will allow anyone to talk about Theo that way. He insists that if they doubt Theo's skills so much, they should just leave, or face the consequences of their words in a duel. Henry and his idiots immediately prepare to fight, but everything changes when both their swords are suddenly covered in a thick layer of ice. The blue-haired girl from earlier steps between them, and they recognize her as Ragnar, one of the 4 hounds of the north. Interestingly, she isn't the only one who has arrived, as the final member appears as well, a muscular giant named Hulkus Lanky. He immediately starts asking for someone called the Flashing Tiger, who is the master of this training ground, Theo Ragnar, since he's come to duel him, and judging by Rai's expression, she is likely there for the same reason. However, the truth is that no one has seen Theo for quite some time, as he took his training so seriously that he has stayed in the dungeon from the moment he entered until now. Nearly finishing it, he has defeated 200 demonic beasts, raising his stats to absurd levels. According to the system, he only has 1 beast left to defeat, But before continuing, he drinks another beginner's healing potion, which has basically been the only thing keeping him alive all this time. Looking at the pile of corpses on the ground, he admits that defeating the creatures became a bit easier as he leveled up. The fact that only one enemy remains means he is about to face the boss. With that, he enters the 5th floor of the dungeon, where he is forced to pull out the last sword he has in his inventory. It's the ceremonial sword his mother gave him for his birthday, which in his past life he never even used because they didn't get along. Looking at it now, he can finally see how much effort she put into giving him that gift. Back then, because of his own frustration over being weak, he told her he didn't have time to waste on such nonsense. He even told her that it was her fault his bloodline was so weak. Theo decides to set that painful memory aside as he doesn't plan to repeat the mistakes of his past life. With newfound determination, he enters the boss room where the system automatically warns him to be extremely careful as he is about to face a high-level demonic beast. However, the most impressive part is that it's not a wolf like the others but a dragon. Even if it's low tier, it's still one of the strongest creatures and the emblem of his house, so he has to defeat it. Taking advantage of the fact that it's still asleep, he decides to try using the unique flash, a technique he has been perfecting over the past 2 months. With that, he lunges at the creature with a quick and precise strike that, while light years behind his father's, still works. He manages to pierce one of its eyes, causing it to bleed heavily. In response, the dragon tries to crush him with its tail, but Teo nimbly dodges it and stays on the offensive. He uses a secret technique called the Fool's Step, which allows him to land dozens of consecutive deep cuts. It works again, and he genuinely begins to think he can win. He figures he should distract it with a normal attack first, and then target its weak point with the unique flash. It sounds like a great plan until the dragon starts to roar, activating Fear, a state that reduces the movement speed of nearby enemies by 10%. As a result, Theo is practically paralyzed, and before he can adjust to the heaviness of his body, the dragon tries to crush him again. Fortunately, he manages to dodge just enough to avoid being smashed into the floor, but the impact of the move slams him hard against one of the cave walls, reminding him not to get overconfident because this is still a boss. Besides, the longer the battle drags on, the worse it will go for him. So he toughens up and moves in to pierce every dragon's weak spot, the inverted scale on the underside of its neck. Luckily, his plan works because he manages to drive his sword all the way in, but unfortunately, it only manages to further infuriate the beast. Meanwhile, Ray and Hulkus are arguing over which of them should face Theo first. She tells him a loser like him should wait, reminding him that she beat him 3 years ago. They start arguing like children until the giant decides to settle it the Ragnar way, with a battle. He charges at her with his sword, and Ray blocks him with absurd ease, pushing back with equal force. The thing is, that second blow never lands, because none other than Remington appears between them. He warns them that he won't allow them to cause trouble in Theo's domain while he's away. Of course, those two blatantly ignore him, insisting they wanted to fight him too. But all of that is pushed aside when they are paralyzed by a surge of killing intent that engulfs the entire training camp. This intent is coming from Teo himself, who approaches them using his new skill, which he stole from his last opponent, the Lesser Dragon's Fear. This takes us back to the Great Battle, where despite that final burst of rage, Teo managed to defeat the beast, which fell to the ground as the system began to list the rewards, including a dragon tooth and a dragon grip. These are upgrade materials used in crafting weapons to make them more durable and sharp. Because of this, our protagonist thinks about applying them to the sword his mother gave him, which was quite worn out after the battle, and that's when he discovers that he also obtained the Fear skill, which consists of releasing a killing intent that inflicts great terror on targets weaker than the user. He is immediately excited, as he had heard that only the chosen ones could use such a power, but then he wonders if it will really be useful within the halls of the clan, where everyone is a prodigy with great potential. After that, the dungeon is completely cleared and he leaves, at which point the system informs him that he has finished the mission to uncover the secret of the Camellia Palace, and his reward is a nest compass. He doesn't know what it means yet, but he senses it will lead him directly to his next mission. Whatever it may be, he puts it in his inventory and stumbles toward his room, hoping to get some well-deserved rest. The problem is that right then, one of the maids comes running to warn him that a massive fight is breaking out on the training grounds at that very moment. That's how Theo was able to interrupt those lunatics at just the right time, taking the opportunity to test his new skill while shouting for them to disappear, as he wants nothing to do with anyone and desperately needs to rest. And this is where things get interesting, because his Fear skill is so powerful that it causes the weaker ones to fall to the ground in convulsions, which surprises Hulkus as he knows it's caused by an overwhelming murderous intent. Without hesitation, he lunges at Theo with a devastating attack. However, the real surprise comes when Theo blocks him easily, something he definitely wouldn't have been capable of 2 months ago. Because of that, Theo can't believe he actually did it, and he's momentarily paralyzed while Hulkus responds with an even more powerful strike. In that moment, Theo remembers that although Hulkus is the weakest of the 4 hounds, it's only because he isn't very smart. In fact, the guy is the strongest in his own clan, so facing him one-on-one would be foolish if it weren't for how much Theo has leveled up lately. To make that even clearer, He blocks encounters with a unique flash straight to the abdomen, which turns out to be enough to knock him out cold from the shock of being defeated in a single blow. Of course, Holkis isn't the only one amazed, as seeing what he could achieve upon his return, Civil and the others begin to celebrate and go even wilder when they see their swords shatter into clear proof that he is now above the four hounds. Meanwhile, Ray and Remington watch the situation in disbelief, and the girl can't help but remember that winter night 10 years ago when she first met Theo. Back then, he was walking through the cold with hardly any clothes on, yet worried about her being cold. He gave her his scarf and took her to his home to protect her from the storm. That's why she smiles now at the idea of seeing him become so strong, and she simply leaves, leaving Remington even more confused. After that, Theo returns home, where his mother throws him a party for earning the title of Flashing Tiger, feeding him all the food in the palace while the servants shower him with endless praise. Each one more embarrassing than the last, and for a moment Theo wants to tell them to leave him alone. But then he remembers how they died before, his own weakness, and simply thanks them for their affection. However, his mother's smile disappears when she sees the sword she gave him was destroyed. Not because he broke it, but because it was supposed to be made of the finest materials, even the famous iron ebony wood, which means it should be practically indestructible. This surprises Theo, as it's an extremely expensive and rare material, so he wonders where she could have gotten so much money. Although he tries to calm her by saying he'll just use another sword, she assures him she'll get him a new one, just in time for the awakening ceremony in a week. What's more, she tells him they should go look for a new sword immediately, heading to the best workshop in all of Winterra, the Basque Workshop. It's one of the 3 great weapon-making centers in the entire region. Its fame is mainly due to the fact that it's so large it operates like a factory, but also to the reputation of its master, who has been ranked as special grade by the intelligence agency. She holds the title of Master Craftsman, which only 2 other artisans in Ragnar possess, and some people know her as the Elf of Capitalism incarnate, while others call her the demonic artisan Kursen. When she sees the protagonist's mother arrive, she greets her normally, as if they've known each other forever. Not only that, but Cecilia even starts scolding her for smoking, calling her mother. In response, the elf tells her that their mother-daughter relationship ended the day she chose to run away, which blows Theo's mind as he understood that his mom was an orphan with no family, and now it turns out she's half-elf. Either way, Cecilia tells her she's come to return a defective product and tosses the shattered sword at her, surprising the elf, because there's no possible way one of her swords should have ended up like that. That's exactly why she asks who wielded the sword, to which Cecilia replies that it was her son, the genius who will soon rule the Ragnar clan, and he introduces himself to her politely. But Kursen doesn't care, because if he really was the one who used it, then they're going to have a very long conversation. With that, she invites them into her office, and on the way, the protagonist takes the chance to ask his mother about her relationship with the artisan. She explains that Kursen is a sort of adoptive mother who only looked after her for about 6 months, as she's a crazy woman obsessed with beautiful things, including weapons, jewelry, theaters, and even people. As for why she left the workshop, the elf explains that the brat abandoned her just to become one of the Ragnar clan leader's concubines. Since she never agreed with it, they ended on bad terms and didn't see each other again until a year ago, when she came crawling back asking her for a favor. Forged a sword to give to her son. Despite Kursen's bitter tone, Theo thinks it's obvious she's just being difficult, but he also feels a bitter taste in his mouth as he realizes that he never really put in the effort to learn anything about his mother in his past life, since he was so obsessed with his own weakness that he forgot to pay attention to the people around him. After a while, they arrive at Kursen's room, the master's office, where she quickly locks herself in with the protagonist, leaving Cecilia outside. Once they are alone, she asks him if he has any relics of the primordial dragon. This shocks Theo, as that's the ancestor of the guardian dragon that protects the clan, and legend says that the remains of that dragon were hidden throughout all of Winterra as a sort of treasure for the Ragnar descendants. That's all Theo knows, that it's a legend, but that only makes Kursen angrier. She insists there's no way one of her swords would break against anything other than one of those relics. He still doesn't understand what she's talking about, because it was only damaged while fighting the dragon. So Kursen decides to show him, guiding him toward a sort of coffin sealed with chains. The curious thing is that instead of a coffin, Theo sees the blue glow of a quest, the same glow that led him to the dungeon door of Camellia Palace. Although he says nothing, just seeing his reaction, the elf knows he can perceive something others can't. She explains that she has tried to open this coffin over and over again to get the treasure inside. But nothing works, she mentions, insisting it is one of the relics, one born long ago when the primordial dragon pulled out one of its fangs and forged a sword called the Monster Sword, also known as the Blade of White Moonlight. The sword is hidden inside the coffin, which is actually just a scabbard. So, she proposes that if he manages to remove the seal and free the sword, he can keep it. However, he could lose his life in the process, and she asks if he's willing to take the risk. Theo just smiles, stating that the sword will be his. At that moment, a new quest window appears with the goal of being chosen by the relic. Interestingly, this isn't the first time Theo has heard of the Blade of White Moonlight. In his past life, about 4 years in the future, it belonged to the Black Dragon, leader of the Black Snow, and one of the 9 dragons, a warrior so strong that no one who saw the sword lived to tell about it. However, there was one time where by pure coincidence, he ended up seeing the true form of the sword, and to his surprise, the Black Dragon let him leave alive. The fact that the sword is in Kursen's possession means the Black Dragon hasn't claimed it yet, so this is his chance to get it. Using the same blue key as before, he opens the scabbard, releasing a great wave of black energy that at first he seems to have under control, until it suddenly envelops him completely. After that, everything goes black, and when he wakes up, he is no longer in the elf's office. Instead, he finds himself lying near some rubble at Rose Palace, reliving his final moments and remembering the humiliation of watching his mother die. His goal was to get stronger and crush Camellia Palace. But everything changes when he is suddenly attacked from behind by a griffin, just like the one that accompanied the white dragon. This creature seems powerful until Theo shuts its beak with a single hand. He tells it that it's rude to try and take over someone's mind by using their desire for power against them. Suddenly, the memories fade, and the bird calls him insolent. The protagonist tells it that it shouldn't have underestimated him like that, noting that it looks quite different from the griffin he remembers. It's smaller and weaker, which he'll use to his advantage to force it to give him its power, whether it likes it or not. It becomes clear that this bird is the White Moonlight Blade, which he tames through brute force while in the real world. Cecilia panics seeing his body lying on the ground. Naturally, she blames Kursen for putting him in that state, but Kursen doesn't say a word. He can see the monster's energy mixing into his bloodstream, admitting he had never seen anything like it. He'd hoped that since Theo already had a relic, it would be easier for him. Still, Cecilia warns that she'll make him pay if anything bad happens to her son, and the argument continues until the very energy from the sword begins to concentrate in the protagonist's chest. Suddenly, he wakes up and assures them they have nothing to worry about, because it's all over. Right then, the system announces that by taming the griffin, the mission was successfully completed. His reward is possession of the White Moonlight Blade. Theo thinks it wasn't that hard because the bird was in a weakened state, but the real surprise comes when the sword increases his magic power considerably, jumping from 30 to 200, the level of a high-ranking swordsman classified as divine. Even so, he knows he won't be able to use it until after the ceremony. After congratulating him for surviving, Kursen notices the sword trembling in his hand, meaning it's resisting and still doesn't consider him its master. He'll have to earn its respect by helping it release all the frustration built up from centuries of being unused. In other words, it's time to fight. Kursen invites him to test the sword against one of the walls, assuring him that a strike from a kid like him could never damage the workshop. Taking him at his word, Theo decides to attack with everything he's got, using all his physical strength while also imbibing it with his magic power. The thing is, as soon as he begins to prepare his strike, Kursen realizes that he probably could damage the workshop and asks him to stop. But it's already too late. In a single flash, he doesn't just break the test wall, he slices the entire room in half, leaving her speechless. Immediately, Kursen can practically see the money flowing out of her pockets like a waterfall, and Theo realizes the sword is even more dangerous than he thought, as it absorbed all his magic power and channeled it into one big attack. However, before he can even process what happened, the elf appears beside him and places her hand on his chest, claiming he isn't as skilled with magic as he thinks, and that he actually did that with the edge of the blade. She also realizes that he is definitely a genius who happens to be her grandson. So, she starts doing mental math on how to profit from him before declaring that she will become his sponsor, so he can show the world his skills, which basically means he'll become a walking advertisement for the Basque workshop. Cecilia can clearly see the money signs in her eyes, and after that they head out. But Theo has the decency to give her the dragon claws he won in his last mission to pay for the repairs to her workshop. Because of that, the elf thinks her daughter really raised an amazing boy. However, her thoughts are interrupted when someone behind her greets her. Kursen turns around annoyed, only to find a raven, and she asks it what the hell it's doing there. After that, some time passes until the day of the ceremony finally arrives, where Theo and Evelyn train a bit before starting. For the first time, she openly praises him, mentioning that his technique has become faster and stronger overall. At this point, half a year has passed since his regression, and since he began to change. Evelyn thinks that if he awakens a good amount of magic power, a monster will be born. Just then, Theo blocks one of her strongest attacks, which she takes as a sign that he's ready, and though she'll pray for his success, a part of her knows he doesn't need it. Quite humbly, Theo tells her she's right, and that he knows he'll be the strongest at the ceremony, but he'll be sure to mention her name in his thank you speech. Right away, his friends ask him to mention them too, and he promises to do so. He decides to give it a try before heading to the central headquarters, where he introduces himself to the guards at the gate as Theo Ragnar from the Camellia Palace. His entrance catches the attention of not just a few, but hundreds of people, as the awakening ceremony is the most important annual event for the clan. It is the first place where Ragnar swordsmen have the chance to be recognized and honored, and the site where true legends are born. Those hundreds of gazes also include the clan leader, who looks at him calmly. The 9 dragons are there as well, including Julio, who smiles as always, and Hilda Ragnar, the former leader from 2 generations ago. Though she doesn't look it, she is 150 years old and possesses incomparable strength. After a while, the judge in charge announces that they will begin the preliminary examination. This consists of pulling a sword from the ground and using it to leave a mark on the solid steel wall on the platform. The catch is that the wall was forged with a white-grade steel alloy, while the swords are made of completely ordinary metal. In other words, it should be impossible to leave a mark. However, that changes if they apply magic to their attacks, which they can achieve by swallowing Soma, a pill that helps them effectively open their mana channels. Simply put, the first test is to open their mana chambers and use that mana to attack, meaning the depth of the cut will determine their results. With that settled, they begin calling the participants one by one, and the first is none other than Theo. As he steps onto the platform, he remembers that in his past life, Axion was the one who earned the recognition as the best in the ceremony. But that is about to change. At the same time, the system assigns him a new quest, to show all these people what he's made of. Meanwhile, Hilda asks Kyle if that's the boy he mentioned before. When he insists, she realizes that she too can see the potential inside him, admitting that he has definitely caught her attention, and she is dying to see how competent the boy really is. Meanwhile, having already picked up one of the swords, Theo prepares to attack, feeling quite nervous after all the time he spent waiting for this moment. Then he is told to consume the Soma, which transports his mind back to his past life, when he was unable to control the magic power generated after swallowing the pill, which severely damaged his energy core. However, he knows things are very different this time. As soon as he swallows the Soma, a massive amount of magic erupts around him, creating a wave so large that onlookers believe it will spiral out of control. It turns out that to allow the mana chamber to settle into the energy core, one must be very careful when releasing the first wave of magic energy. Even the most powerful Ragnars can end up incapacitated if they aren't careful, so the judge assumes Theo is finished. What he didn't expect was that after a few agonizing seconds, the energy finally stabilizes, and the protagonist couldn't be happier to have a mana chamber in addition to the dragon heart, as he will now be able to use magic freely. In fact, he decides to take this opportunity to unleash a combined attack using both sources of energy, which results in a slash that shakes the entire place, practically materializing in the shape of a dragon. Not only that, but he also used the single flash technique, leading to an unprecedented result that Axion watches with rage. He doesn't just leave a mark on the Great Wall, he creates a massive crack that runs through it from end to end. The judge immediately announces that he's moving on to the next round, and in the stands, no one can believe that's the slash of someone who just released their mana for the first time. Finally, his bad luck level drops to 0, meaning the curse has ended. But that's not the only thing the system tells him, as it announces that many people have shown interest in his performance, including Osa Ragnar, who wants him as a disciple, and the crow from before, a man named Robert Ragnar. Furthermore, Hilda was more than satisfied with his performance, something he didn't expect, but it will definitely be helpful, since she possesses the heart of Garuda, an item that could change everything for him. However, we aren't told what it's for yet, and we move on to the rest of the participants, where Siv and the others show off their pride, followed by the king, Kulkas, and Remington. They all leave quite impressive marks, even if they don't compare to our protagonists. Finally, the only one left is Axion, who steps forward in silence, feeling the pressure from everyone. He hears people commenting that he will definitely fall behind Theo. That, combined with the humiliation of leaving the Camellia Palace, ignites a red mana in him so powerful that it stabilizes within seconds. Most impressively, he leaves behind a dragon made of pure energy, just like the protagonist. But it doesn't end there, because Axion even manages to leave a mark practically identical to Theo's. In the stands, people can't believe there are two people so equally matched in strength in the same ceremony, but Axion simply walks away without saying a word, as this is only the beginning. After a while, the judge announces that the first stage of the ceremony has successfully ended, congratulating them for being one of the most promising generations they've had in years. Now, those who passed must prepare for the second stage in 4 days. Although it's still too early to determine the final results, the preliminary rankings are ready. I can now announce that the top performer in the first stage of the awakening ceremony is Theo Ragnar. Suddenly, everyone in the stands starts cheering, while the judge explains that he earned a perfect score of 10 out of 10. His technique, magical power, control, and speed were all flawless. He even came very close to the record set by young Torkel Ragnar, one of the strongest successors ever, who is said to be among the top 5 candidates to become the successor. Interestingly, Axiom also scored a 10 out of 10, but he wasn't given first place simply because his mark was a few centimeters smaller than Theo's. The judge congratulates him as well, but the anger on the boy's face is unmatched. He doesn't even listen as they announce the rest of the rankings, with Remington in 3rd place, Ray in 4th, and Hulkus in 5th. After that, the judge congratulates them again for their hard work, explaining that the second stage will take place in 3 days in the snowy mountains. They are expecting all 87 participants who passed the initial round, and they finally announce that they are dismissed. That night, Remington and Theo meet up with their friends, who see their great achievements as a victory for the entire training camp. In response, the protagonist also congratulates them for passing, since the goal is for every single one of them to pass the second round together. Evelyn is sure they'll make it, but Remington can't help feeling a bit ashamed of how much he's fallen behind. His tone is so sad that Theo reassures him, saying he just got lucky and that at the end of the day, ranks and rankings don't matter among friends. This helps the white-haired boy relax a bit as he vows to do his best in the second stage. We then skip forward 3 days to the moment Theo arrives at the snowy mountains. While taking in the view, he thinks that placing first in the ceremony is an achievement he wouldn't have even dared to dream of in his past life. But here he is, and it's more real than ever. Even though it wasn't a real fight, he even beat Axiom. That's why he can't stop. This is only the beginning. Getting rid of Rendon helped him realize that the man who ruined his life was nothing more than a lackey. His true enemies are Axiom and Ed, and he's going to use everything at his disposal to get his ultimate revenge. Just then, he takes out his latest reward, the Nest Compass, which hasn't stopped moving since he arrived. It's now pointing toward the Winter Mountains, meaning this second test will be the perfect chance to see what this nest is all about. Suddenly, he senses movement behind him. In an instant, he disappears and positions his sword against the neck of the person who had been following him. It's a simple warrior who introduces himself as part of the Wind Sword platoon. He's there because his captain sent him to watch Theo's performance and offer him the chance to take a special entrance exam to join them. This is where things get interesting, because they are one of the most important platoons in the clan. But before Theo can say anything, a representative from the Black Iron Cavalry appears, another elite group, to tell Theo to join them instead. However, she isn't the only one. Just then, dozens of other warriors arrive, offering him the exact same thing. Ao is about to leave and let them fight among themselves, when none other than Osa Ragnar appears. She is the clan leader's first wife and is known as the Sword Dragon. She declares that she's also there to see him in action. However, in a sudden scene change, we see a warrior's head cut so brutally that the poor guy didn't even have a chance to call for help. This was all at the hands of Axion, who advances through the training ground, taking down his own comrades as he goes. He acts like a whirlwind of rage, driven only to destroy, replaying every single humiliation he had to endure because of the protagonist. He then grabs the head of one of his companions and slams it into the ground, completely crushing him until only lifeless bodies remain around him. Suddenly, someone moves and attacks like a hunter desperate for its next prey, but despite fighting with everything he has, the tip of his sword is easily stopped by Ed, who doesn't hesitate for a second, before calling him pathetic. Ed tells him that showing his anger like that won't change anything, and Axion is so desperate that he barely even recognizes him. Ed explains that in moments like this, he needs to calm down and come up with a plan, asking him to follow him so he can tell him exactly how to turn the second stage of the ceremony into a funeral for that bastard Theo. Ragnar. Meanwhile, Osa steps forward through the snow, admitting that she has also come to win the favor of this talented young man. This leaves everyone speechless because they know any offer they might have had for him becomes useless with her involved. However, that becomes even clearer when something in the area begins to glow, and out of nowhere, a giant flower envelops her, and the protagonist in an illusory space. She created this world so they could speak with a little more privacy. From the outside, it looks like he's trapped in a cocoon, but inside is a practically infinite space that very few have ever had the privilege to see. She then tells him that Julius will kill her for approaching him, so she'll make the most of this opportunity to give him a gift. Of course, Theo doesn't understand anything, so she explains that while Kiel's sword is powerful, like a dragon's breath that consumes everything in its path, hers is a bit different. She wants her sword and her way of fighting to be changing and dynamic, like a dragon that adapts to everything in its way. To make her point clearer, she transforms the space into a flowery tree and begins to fight, demonstrating agile and fast movements, but above all, beautifully lethal ones. Theo is so impressed that he can't help but stand there with his mouth open like an idiot, completely speechless. When she finishes, she explains that this is the first full blooming technique, the Reign of Celestial Flowers. But despite the name, the protagonist is barely processing the fact that he saw her perform over 120 movements in a single breath. This confirms the rumors he heard in his past life, that even Kyle is below her when it comes to battle techniques. The reason Osa decided to show him this is her gift, a unique slashing technique that with some practice, he can incorporate into his own battle style. After that, the woman dissolves the illusory space, stating that if he wants to see more, he can find her anytime after the ceremony as she has high expectations for him. Finally, she disappears, and the protagonist still can't believe what just happened, admitting to himself that he just received an incredibly massive gift. Afterward, he meets up with the others near the Great Northern Wall, where the supervisor explains that this winter mountain range is the Ragnar family's base. It's a vast and majestic area that separates the rest of the continent from the Cursed Sea, where monsters roam like it's literal hell. They have been responsible for fighting these creatures for over 1,000 years, and it is expected that all of them will be able to continue that duty for many more years. That's why they've chosen this place for the second stage of the ceremony, so they can start getting familiar with the battlefield. However, he warns them that they are forbidden from entering the Cursed Sea, as the test area is limited to the inside of the Great Wall. With that said, the test is simple. They have 15 days to defeat as many creatures as possible within the mountain range and retrieve the bells hanging from their necks, which are classified into 7 colors based on difficulty. Purple is the hardest of all. In fact, he doesn't expect anyone to actually be able to get one of those, but they are ready to be amazed, and the higher the difficulty, the more points you'll earn. As for methods, you can do whatever you want. All that matters is how many bells you have at the end, which clearly implies they expect to see you fighting one another. That said, they've set up some strategic totems to act as safe zones with supplies. There are no monsters there, and with that, the test begins. Everyone scatters as quickly as possible, and Sybil thinks about getting supplies first before meeting up with her friends to help Teo. Holku only thinks about how much fun this will be, while Axion holds on to the words of his uncle, all while being closely watched by Rei. On the other hand, Teo arrives at a clearing where he is surprised by Remington, who suddenly tells him that he doesn't just see him as a friend, but also as a rival, meaning he intends to defeat him. Even though our protagonist is confused at first, he smiles and confesses that he knows that feeling, and he also sees him as a rival. This puts the white-haired boy at ease, and he wishes Teo luck since he will fight hard for first place. With their cards on the table, he simply disappears. Teo thinks this only makes things more exciting. This is the fun he had always wanted to experience in his past life. However, there's now something more important, the dragon's nest. After all, the time has finally come to start looking for it. He heads toward the outer region of the Winter Mountain Range, reaching a point where the compass finally stops spinning. Curiously, it suddenly starts pointing toward the ground. He wonders if he'll have to dig, and how the heck he's supposed to do that without proper tools. Then it occurs to him to use his sword, which puts the bird inside him on high alert, warning him not to even think about it. But Teo ignores him and unleashes an attack so powerful it could have easily created a huge hole in the ground. However, as the camera pans out, we see he didn't actually aim down, but at the forest in front of him, telling whoever has been following him that it's time to come out and show themselves. The enemy is shocked that Teo sensed their presence. But the problem here is that it's not just one person, but 3 warriors Theo recognizes. In the future, they will be known as the villains of Buskan, responsible for harming civilians during a mission and passing it off as an accident. These guys are basically the dark side of the Ragnar mentality, taking survival of the fittest to the extreme, and our protagonist knows their crimes better than anyone. As part of his job in the Dark Guard, he had to handle the Buksan cleanup. They had to clear 761 mangled bodies that were left behind, making it impossible to identify anyone individually because every single head had been completely crushed. To make matters worse, over 220 people were missing, so Theo knew he'd have to deal with them eventually. He just didn't expect the opportunity to arise so soon, and the fact that they're following him now means someone sent them. He asks if it's Axion's doing, but the leader claims they wouldn't take orders from another rookie. They were sent by someone so important that a bastard like him couldn't even imagine it. However, just by hearing them talk about lineage, Theo can already take a guess. They're here on orders from the Council Elder, which explains why they weren't detected. They immediately react, proving him right, but they insist it doesn't matter since they plan to kill him anyway. The leader threatens to destroy his handsome face, not expecting that with a single attack, our protagonist would be able to decapitate all 3 of them at the exact same time. Of course, he was lucky that they were still young and inexperienced. Not to mention he technically had a bit of help, as he took the chance to practice the technique Osa taught him, using fluid and varied movement patterns that idiots like them couldn't keep up with. Sure, he still has a lot of growing to do, and that's what missions are for, so he throws their heads down the ravine and walks away to figure out an escape route, when suddenly he hears them hit something. Looking over the edge, he discovers an invisible staircase. The system automatically announces that he's unlocked a hidden mission to explore the Blue Light Cave, and Theo knows this is the right path, so he heads out, unaware that he's being watched by a crow. In a scene change, the council members receive a detailed report on the situation, stating that Axion is in first place with 41 creatures collected, Rei is in second, and Theo hasn't defeated a single enemy yet. This causes Julius's smile to vanish, and the old man begins to lecture him, reminding him there's no guarantee that those who excelled in the first phase will do the same in the second, especially a bastard. In his mind, the old man claims victory, thinking his subordinates handled things better than expected, and he gives Ed a confident smile to let him know everything is under control. The problem is, Ed doesn't find it funny at all. He's practically having a heart attack because he's been very careful with his moves since losing the Camellia Palace, focusing on finding a primal dragon relic hidden in the Rose Palace. Still, he found nothing, so he assumes Theo must have it. Therefore, the goal isn't just to kill him, but to seize the relic. He sends a subordinate to inform Axion that things have gotten complicated, and Osa notices he's up to something, suggesting to Julius that they send some help to the protagonist. However, Julius says it's not necessary. He's sure his candidate has everything under control too. Back with Theo, he enters a sinister cave filled with corpses, but none of that matters because what he's looking for is right there. Finally, he realizes what it is. This is the nest of the Chilling Heath, which in the other timeline, it was discovered 3 years in the future, along with an object so valuable that it was classified as legendary. Naturally, he plans to claim it, so he excitedly enters the chamber, only to find mountains upon mountains of gold coins guarded by a dragon so large and powerful that Theo knows just by looking at it that he'd never survive a battle against it. Worst of all, it's clearly not what he expected. He assumed it would be a hatchling because of the word nest, and staying here would mean a direct ticket to heaven. That's why he makes the sensible choice to leave and return when he has become strong enough, but everything goes south when the dragon wakes up and stares him down as if evaluating its next meal. Theo freezes in place, but the biggest surprise comes when the dragon begins to speak, introducing himself as Lord Brock, and recognizes our protagonist as a Ragnar, a descendant of the guardian dragon. Because of this, Theo bows before him, calling him his ancestor. Even if that part is a bit confusing, it turns out Brock is the guardian dragon who started the clan. However, he clarifies that the Ragnars aren't half-dragon, since a dragon would never mate with a human, but rather there is an exchange of souls, a contract that has kept them linked for years. Our protagonist doesn't fully understand it either, but Brock cuts him off, insisting it's time to fulfill his responsibility as a dragon toward the Ragnar bloodline by giving him the chance to ask 3 questions. Naturally, this relieves our hero, as it means he won't have to fight him, and if all goes well, he can ask more about the family, gaining key information that probably no one else knows. Logically, this will give him an advantage in the war for the throne. Changing scenes, we see Axion annihilating a giant tiger, which is his 57th kill so far. He asks his companions, or rather his slaves, what they know about the protagonist, and they clarify that nobody knows where he is. One of them, a guy named Orion, claims he's sure the coward has already run away, thinking it's in his best interest to keep following Axion, who is destined to become his father's successor. The problem is that even saying what he wants to hear won't save him from Axion's wrath. Before the poor guy can do anything to defend himself, Axion grabs him by the neck, choking him and telling him to stop being so condescending, because there's no way Theo isn't planning something. Just then, a message arrives from Ed, informing him that it's time to speed up the execution of the plan. Axion doesn't take this well and sends word back that he's aware something is wrong, but not to worry, because he wants to kill Theo more than anyone and will do so the moment he sees him. Back with the protagonist, after thinking about it for a long while, he finally asks his first question. Brock, who is about to fall asleep from boredom, tells him it's about time. Luckily, it was worth the wait as the protagonist asks what reason he has for being here. It's simple but key to understanding the relationship between the Ragnars, the dragons, and the world. Brock explains he is there because of the Nameless Lord, the monster that exists beyond the sea, at the farthest edge of the world. That is the reason, which is why he stayed there for 1,000 years, to protect the world from him. Theo realizes he was right when he first noticed that Brock's eyes didn't show anger but fear. This makes it clear that the Nameless Lord is a being so powerful that he can make one of the oldest dragons of them all tremble. He naturally wants to dig deeper, but he needs more information first. His second question is, what are the primeval dragon's artifacts? Brock mocks his ignorance, believing Theo already holds 3 of them. Theo knows the sword is one and assumes the Camellia Palace dungeon is another, but he has no idea what the third could be. The dragon then explains that these artifacts were created by Bafnir, the primeval dragon who split his soul into 31 fragments to protect humanity from the Nameless Lord. They aren't limited to physical objects, they can be items, experiences, or even strange phenomena. Then realizes the third artifact in his possession is regression, that inexplicable event that sent him 20 years into the past and helped him through the system. The strange thing is that, unlike the others, regression only came to him without a dragon or a trial to earn it. When he realizes what that implies, his next question is why they chose him, a human with no talent, to go back and face the Nameless Lord. However, things get interesting when Brock responds with another question. Why do you think only you were specially chosen? That changes everything. At that moment, Theo realizes that Ed, Kirsten, and Julius all know about the artifacts. They have fought hard to find them, which could mean they and others might be seeing the same system messages. There might even be other regressors. Once the questions are over, Brock announces it's time for Theo to receive his reward. He can choose any of the invaluable treasures in the nest. Theo immediately thinks of the famous grimoire they claimed in the other timeline. But his goal has changed, and he declares that what he wants is Lord Brock himself. After seeing his serious face, the dragon starts laughing at the top of his lungs. He says it was a great joke and tells Theo he can say what he actually wants now. However, Theo looks at him dead seriously, clarifying it's not a joke. In response, Brock unleashes his fear technique, creating a massive wave that nearly makes the protagonist collapse, while yelling that he's shameless for thinking he can take the dragon, all his treasures, and his ancient knowledge with a simple play on words. His anger is very real, to the point where Theo begins to cry and cough up blood from the sheer effort of staying on his feet. Desperate now, he responds by unleashing his own fear, which helps him somewhat counteract his opponents. Of course, the difference between the two is massive, and Brock tells him he won't achieve anything with the simple fear of a lesser dragon. Theo responds that Brock was the one who said he could choose anything among the nest treasures. In short, that includes the dragon himself. Even if Theo thinks it might not work, the risk of this answer is equal to the magnitude of the reward, since having such an ancient and powerful dragon as a companion is the ultimate prize, ultimate legitimacy. It's his ticket to ensuring he never repeats the same mistakes of the past. This is an opportunity he definitely can't let pass by, so he implores her to keep her word and join him. He speaks with such determination that the dragon is surprised, reminding her of Sigurd, the first Ragnar that the dragons ever formed an alliance with. Because of that, she accepts. In an instant, all the fear she had spread throughout the room returns to her body, concentrating until she transforms into her true form, or at least her more human version. She's a beautiful woman who, with a wide smile, admits she'll give him a chance. Theo is speechless, and she assumes he's distracted by her looks, mentioning she is over 2,000 years old. However, the reality is that the protagonist is focused on the large hole in her chest where her dragon heart should be. She admits she lost it 50 years ago, and unfortunately that means she's on her last legs. She likely has no more than 3 years to live. Not only that, but if she leaves the nest, her death could be instant. She makes it clear she won't be able to offer any direct help in battle. With that on the table, Brock asks if he still wants her as his reward, and Theo insists his answer is the same. He needs her. Suddenly, the system announces he has earned the title of Companion of the Guardian Dragon. He assures her he will become stronger and obtain the rest of the relics, as it's possible that among all those treasures, there's something that can replace her heart. He's not doing it out of pity or obligation, but because that's what a good companion should do. With that settled, she tells him he can count on her. Since she can't accompany him anywhere else, she will stay in a dormant state, waiting patiently until he finds something. The good news is, she has treasures at his disposal to make things easier. She hands him a magic book, explaining that he must read it and open a portal there to serve as a spiritual connection between them. She says it will probably take him a month, but he has enough food so he won't starve. It turns out that's the magic book of Ammon, one of the most valuable objects in the world, but the problem is that Theo doesn't have a month, so he asks if he can return and take care of it in 2 weeks. Once the exam is over, she says that's possible, but she won't allow it. If he really wants to take the exam, he'll have to open the portal before it ends. To make matters worse at this point, he doesn't actually have 2 weeks, but only 13 days, so he'd better hurry up. First, however, we jump back in time to 3 days before the second test at the Central Security Office. There, Ed explains to Axion that the totems create a safe zone thanks to a small sphere containing creatures, even stronger ones sealed inside. In other words, the spheres are meant to scare away those on the outside. But if the sphere is destroyed, the sealed creatures will be released, becoming a way to summon monsters at will. To make it even clearer, he gives him a small demonstration, explaining that Theo will also be focused on hunting monsters, so he can use the sphere as a way to lure and eliminate him. Now, he wants him to remember that's not enough, as what they really care about is getting information about the artifact that should have been in the Rose Palace, which he's sure the brat took. Axiom immediately asks if he should torture him, but Ed insists she should know that won't work because right now they are both equally strong. Even if she wins a battle, she won't be able to subdue him for long. So what she must do is use the protagonist's followers, the guys from the 4th training camp, as hostages. She should trade their lives for information about the artifacts. Filled with rage, Axiom accepts. Back in the present, the remaining days have passed, and there are only 12 hours left until the end of the test. With 860 points, the boy should feel invincible, but he feels like he could have a heart attack because he still hasn't found a single trace of the guy. At this point, he's not the only one who thinks this is all too strange. Even Felix Ragnar from the Flower Palace joined him to search, and he suspects Theo might have actually been killed. In response, Axiom just looks at him, mentioning that it's no surprise Osa is so interested in Theo, since her own apprentice is a complete failure. He insults him a bit more until he stands up, stating it's time to force the brat out of his hiding spot. As for his allies, the Scaled Dragon Society, and those from the Flower Palace, they must start hunting them down until Theo appears. He plans to eliminate the guys from the 4th training camp one by one. After that, they head out, but luckily everything is overheard by Ray, who starts his own plan. At the same time, Civil and another of the boys manage to take down a mid-level monster between them. They work together happily and steadily, mentioning how excited they are to show the protagonist how well they've done. Civil has even been saving supplies for him. They are all smiles until, without warning, the latter is brutally stabbed in the back by 3 members of the Scaled Dragon Society, who have the nerve to tell them that this is just a sacrifice to summon their dear leader. As for the protagonist, Brock watches him proudly, impressed to see that he finally managed to open the portal successfully. Not only that, but he did it in record time. However, he isn't that surprised, as in his other life he had heard that to use a grimoire, the most important things are the quality and quantity of magic power, 2 points that he has more than covered thanks to possessing a dragon's heart as an extra reserve. Of course, he has barely unlocked the book's most basic powers, but it's enough to create a bridge between them. Brock explains that eventually he will even be able to hear her voice wherever she is and borrow some of her power. Of course, for the latter, she first needs to recover, but Theo guarantees that he will save her. With that promise, Brock sends him back outside the cave, looking forward to the next time they can meet. Theo couldn't be happier until he remembers he only has 12 hours left to climb to first place. Of course he knows that they can see each other again. Theo couldn't be happier until he remembers he only has 12 hours left to climb to first place. Of course he knows he won't be able to do it through normal means, so he only has one option left: steal bells from the others, specifically from Axion, who must have the most points right now. However, all of that takes a backseat when someone appears behind him saying, "I found you." Though they seem like an enemy at first, the biggest surprise comes when he realizes it's Rei, who is in terrible condition. O immediately assumes this was the work of some creature, but then he notices sword marks all across her chest. She promises to tell him the details later, saying it's an emergency and they must head west. The problem is, she collapses right there, nearly unconscious, and as he touches her sword to help her up, he ends up activating a spell called Bloodline Synchronization. This allows him to read the weapon's memories, and in doing so, he sees what happened a few minutes earlier. Rei followed Axion and his henchmen, who had kidnapped 9 of the protagonist's allies. Despite the blood and screams, they report that there is still no sign of their target. The villain then mentions that 1 or 2 would have been enough, and they should kill the remaining captives. Before they can commit a massacre, Rei intervenes, warning Axion that he has finally crossed the line. He tells her it's none of her business, and that she should just keep moving, but she doesn't give up and draws her sword, making it clear whose side she is on. Then the girl attacks, and Axion responds with everything he has, slashing her chest in a precise and nearly fatal strike. The memory ends there, leaving Theo more confused than ever. He asks Rei what the hell is going on. Of course, she doesn't know what he saw, so she explains that Axion took his friends hostage to capture him, and she only escaped so she could warn him before it was too late. At the same time, the villain's scouting team discovered his location, warning him that he seems to be heading toward them at full speed. But Axion doesn't care. This is exactly what he wanted, a chance to show the world that Theo can't beat him. As if he was watching everything, his uncle contacts him mentally, reminding him to focus on finding out everything he can about the artifact, since they will handle the villain. Meanwhile, they just need him to interrogate him and use the sphere to distract the nearby supervisors, to which Axion agrees, claiming he has nothing to worry about. For her part, Rei warns the protagonist that the security agency supervisors are working with Axion. So even if he can win, more people could appear behind them and start a massacre. It's better to ask other supervisors for help. But Theo says there's no time, as his friends could be getting tortured or worse right now. With a firm tone, he demands that she lead him to Axion. Rei refuses, reminding him that sometimes it's necessary to make certain sacrifices, but Theo cuts her off, shouting at the top of his lungs that he doesn't want to lose his people again. His words mix with the memories of the last night he spent with the others, when they promised to pass the test together. Rei insists that being a Ragnar is about making sacrifices, but Theo then reminds her that she already chose a side, because she couldn't just stand by in the face of such injustice. He says she can't ask him to do that now, especially when he is finally strong enough to fight. No, he isn't going to repeat the same mistakes from the past, so it's time for her to tell him honestly, where the hell is Axion? Meanwhile, Remington arrives at Sylvie's camp and finds all the supplies they had left behind, kept scattered across the ground, an abandoned bell in the middle of nowhere, and massive puddles of blood. It is obvious that something is wrong, and he says this out loud. He isn't alone. Holkus and Erica, who belong to the same giant clan, are with him. He humbly asks them to help him with the madness that is about to unfold. As for the protagonist, he pushes forward through the snowy forest until he encounters a monster that tries to kill him on the path. However, he has no time for distractions, and with a single strike, he takes it down. He clings to the hope that there is still a high chance the hostages are alive. Axion is unstable, but Ed isn't, and since Ed is the one controlling him, he expects they will try to use the hostages as a trump card to get rid of him. Besides, if Ed sent supervisors to help, it's because he doesn't trust Axion. They aren't just there to kill the protagonist, but also to keep Axion in check if he tries to do something reckless. These are the thoughts passing through his mind as he wipes out every monster that crosses his path, concluding that while it will be difficult, he can still turn the situation in his favor. From a distance, Rayanne is watching it all. She remembers when he saved her and thinks about how he has always been a kind person since they were kids, and she will help him no matter what. With that in mind, she follows him slowly but steadily. Regarding the hostages, we see that Sybil is still alive, trying to resist in her own way, but Axion kicks her in the face to shut her up for good. He even draws his sword ready to kill her. But a voice warns him not to do anything unnecessary, revealing that it isn't Ed speaking, but someone else working with them. In the end, Axion holds back and simply uses Sybil as a seat. He thinks about how his uncle sent 4 high-ranking inspectors from the intelligence agency for this mission, which means he doesn't believe Axion can defeat Theo. It's such a massive humiliation that he practically trembles with rage until something else catches his attention. The sound of footsteps approaching and the hopeful looks of the hostages as they silently plead for their leader's help. And indeed, the protagonist has finally arrived before him, walking through the snow with his clothes covered in blood. Although his gaze is already relentless, when he sees his friends in that state, he is filled with fury, carefully observing all the lowlifes who showed up to do something so disgusting, at which point Axion complains that he kept him waiting. But all Theo can see is Sybil's face, before he utters Axion's name with a sense of helplessness that briefly puts the scoundrel on alert. However, Axion calms himself down, mentioning that he surely understands the situation and that he'll have to do as he's told if he wants to save his friends. What he didn't expect was for Theo to interrupt him, asking if he's afraid to face him. A provocation so simple yet effective that it instantly enrages Axion, as Theo explains that fear is the only thing that would lead him to play so dirty and pathetic, asking him if he was afraid of losing to him, spitting out and insisting that if he isn't a coward and if he has any pride left, then he should face him one-on-one like a true Ragnar. Of course, that's enough for Axion to forget the entire plan and smile, blind with rage, to which Theo admits that if he loses, he'll give him whatever he wants, including his life, all in a tone so confident that it only fans the flames, and even though they warn him that it's a provocation and that he should stick to the plan, Axion tells them to shut up, asking if they have so little faith in him, and with that, he takes up his sword, accepting the duel, and we see that those who were talking to him are the 4 allied inspectors, who panic and wonder if they should intervene. This is where the madness begins, because once the terms of the duel are set, the protagonist doesn't wait even a second before attacking, with a strike that Axion blocks quite efficiently, and that is followed by another strike so dynamic that the madman starts insulting him for using cheap tricks and counterattacks, determined to show him what the power of a Ragnar truly means, and at that moment, he invokes a technique called Roar of the Celestial Dragon, manifesting a wave of energy with the shape and power of a real dragon, taking Theo by surprise. However, that look of disbelief doesn't last long, as he responds with another technique called Dragon's Claws, which cancels out the enemy attack before it can even hit him. Axion immediately panics, unable to believe his eyes, and Theo simply gets back into position, asking if he has another skill to show him, or if that was it. In the distance, one of the cowards almost dies of fear upon realizing how truly strong the protagonist is, and like a total rat, he wonders if it's time to betray Axion and join the winning side until he remembers that they still have the Defense Department supervisors. So, everything should be fine. Even so, there are no more guarantees. So he advises those remaining to scatter, as they don't want to be around when things get ugly. Meanwhile, Axion recalls when he was just a baby and his uncle told him he should take the Ragnar throne for the sake of their true family, the Troyvanes. With that in mind, he admits that move wasn't bad and responds with an attack that, while powerful, only makes Theo feel relieved that Axion is acting exactly as he expected. In the council chamber, they receive word that our protagonist finally appeared and made contact with Axion. This leaves the old man very confused, as he was sure his thugs had eliminated him. As for Ed, he doesn't look very worried, since once his nephew gets the truth out of him, the elites will take care of finishing him off. But his smile vanishes when the messenger reports that Theo and Axion are engaged in an official duel. Just like that, his plan begins to fall apart. Back at the fight, the protagonist uses a new technique called the clown walk, which allows him to move so fast that he creates the illusion of being in several places at the same time. Responding as best he can, Axion admits to himself that he's stronger than he thought. Still, he isn't fast enough, because Axion can read every single one of his movements. He throws his sword in an impressive way that accidentally unlocks certain memories in the protagonist, because it's exactly the same strike that cost him his life in the other timeline. With an arrogant tone, Axion tells him he should pay more attention. And we see that the blade begins to fill with blood. Luckily, that's only because Theo managed to stop it with his hand just in time. Besides, there's something much more important. He finally realizes that Axion is the one in the white hood who took his life back then. Naturally, discovering this ignites a fire in his gaze, as he realizes he was destined to die without knowing who burned down the Rose Palace. To the ashes, he had no power or way to defend himself, so they were arrogant enough to take off their mask and mock him to his face. Thanks to that information and Evelyn's investigation, he followed the clues to the Camellia Palace and the Troyvanes. One of them seems to have an affinity for a specific move, throwing the sword, a technique that requires a high level of arrogance and confidence. It defines a person who isn't afraid of losing their weapon. He already suspected Axion or his uncle might have been responsible, but this is the final confirmation. So, destroying the sword with his fist, he asks him why he's so obsessed with killing him and his people. Even more impressive, before the weapon can even hit the ground, Theo grabs one of the broken halves of his opponent's sword and throws it back. Axion just dodges it, asking what he's trying to do. However, Theo doesn't need words to answer, as he activates Dragon's Fear, an overflow of energy and murderous intent so intense that Axion panics for a moment, wondering if Theo had been holding back during the first part of the ceremony. The thing is that single thought is his downfall, distracting him from the protagonist's next attack, which he is only able to block by pure luck. Then, having closed the distance, Theo asks him when he's going to show the true power of the Ragnar inside him. He provokes him until Axion makes a very clever move, grabbing Theo's arm and pulling him directly toward the edge of his blade. Thanks to that, he leaves a large wound that forces the protagonist to back away, but the victory doesn't last long. Theo immediately closes in and disarms him, asking him if he knows what it feels like to be pierced by a Ragnar sword. At the same time, Remington analyzes the blood left at the camp, determining it couldn't have been a monster. Only someone as bold and deranged as Axion would do something like this. He assumes Axion wants to use the kids as hostages to lure Theo in and kill him. Hulkus considers this a cowardly move, but Eureka reminds them that this is a Ragnar awakening ceremony and things like this are normal. Interestingly, Remington doesn't deny it, but adds that this brutality is exactly what he dislikes about the Ragnar clan. It's a dangerous statement, and he ends by saying he will save his friends and would like them to come along. Without hesitating for a second, Hulkus tells him he can count on him. And without a moment's hesitation, Hulkus tells him that he can count on him. But Erika insists she has no interest in saving weak men, and the only reason she followed along was in hopes of finding Theo. Because of that, Remington promises that if she lends a hand, he'll help her achieve her own goal. With that, the three of them set off, hoping to arrive in time to stop this madness. The problem is that along the way, they run into Axion's friends, who call them traitors for joining Theo's side, and especially for working with those idiots from Clark Lanky. Of course, those insults mean nothing to Remington, who kindly asks them to step aside, not wanting to have to hurt former allies. However, they refuse, leaving them with no choice but to start fighting. Meanwhile, Civil is in the middle of his own mission. When Theo threw his sword toward Axion, Axion dodged it, but the true goal wasn't to hurt him, but something much more important. He threw the sword near Civil so he could free himself, and using what little strength he has left, he grabs a piece of the blade and starts cutting the rope. In the distance, the fight is interrupted by a mysterious hooded figure, who is agile enough to jump between them without a hint of fear. He apologizes to Axion for intervening, willing to accept his punishment once the trial is over. We see that it's Liam Troybon, one of the 4 inspectors sent by him, who orders the other 3 to take the master away while he handles Theo. That's how the second round begins, and although they compliment Axion on how well he fought, the condescending tone he uses only furiouses the crazy guy. He glares menacingly at the protagonist, keeping up with someone who should be light years ahead of him. As he continues to trade blows, Liam also recognizes that Theo is stronger than he thought. However, he remains certain that Theo isn't on his level yet, and though it pains him to get rid of such a talented young man, he won't hold back. He knows it's the perfect time to eliminate him, remembering that what he's doing is for the future of the Troybon family, and with that in mind, he rises against him, ready to deliver the final blow. The look of shock on Theo's face gives him the confidence that the poor guy won't be able to defend himself. Unfortunately, what he doesn't know is that the surprise has nothing to do with him, and suddenly a spray of blood splatters between them, revealing that Liam's chest had been brutally pierced by a sword. A sword he recognizes immediately, as it's the weapon of Axion, who appears behind him with bloodthirsty eyes, stating that he warned them. He warned them not to interfere in his fight. The entire scene is so surreal that Theo is left with his mouth open, and Liam turns around in complete disbelief before falling to the ground. At that moment, the other inspectors approach, asking what on earth he's doing, but he gives them a demonic look, saying they only interfered because they thought he was going to give up, and that's an insult he can't ignore. The fact that he's capable of killing his own family is confirmation that he's insane. Although Axion knows he's strong, he's so obsessed with the teachings of his uncle that he can't even imagine anyone being stronger than him, since he is the one destined to claim the throne and will eliminate anyone who stands in his way. And with that in mind, he throws himself Theo and attacks, destroying a good part of the place in his path, but his astonishment grows when under the rubble, there isn't even a trace of the protagonist, who jumped just in time and lunges at him, driving his sword into his chest. Meanwhile, the inspectors approach Liam, unable to believe how reckless and unstable Axion is, to which Liam orders them to stop wasting time and go help him. It doesn't matter if the brat is throwing a tantrum, they have to kill Theo, because if Axion dies, they're all finished. At the same time, Axion resists, pushing the sword away before it can sink deeper, but beyond just fear, his face shows pure disbelief. Even though his uncle warned him that anything could happen in battle, he never imagined he could actually be at risk. He truly never understood why his uncle was so obsessed with crushing this talentless nobody, and now, even as he bleeds internally, he can't accept that trash like him could defeat him. Gathering his last remaining strength, he screams that he will take the throne, launching an attack that is powerful, yet at the same time completely useless, because Theo doesn't even flinch. He recognizes that this unchecked ambition is what has cost the lives of so many people, and seeing that the man won't listen to reason, it seems he'll have to crush that bloodthirsty ambition the hard way. Because of that, he immediately strikes back with the dragon's claws, neutralizing the attack in front of everyone, and more importantly, severing his head with such intensity that it generates a massive wave of energy that spreads through the entire forest. In the end, Axion's body simply falls to the ground motionless, and seconds later, his head joins it, staring back at him with a mixture of rage, hatred, and even a bit of pity. The one most in disbelief is Liam, who watches with his mouth open and can't help but call out to Axion as if what's happening were just a nightmare. But of course it isn't. After that, he and the other inspectors have to watch as the blood slowly flows from Theo's blade, dripping onto Axion's lifeless head. When he finally realizes what has happened, Liam starts screaming like a madman to kill him. With that, the 3 who can still fight lung towards him. Our protagonist can only think that things are about to get complicated, as he's not foolish enough to believe he can take on several high-ranking inspectors, especially not in the state he's in, and for a moment, he wonders if this is how it all ends. To be killed right after achieving his revenge, but just then, the inspectors are stopped by Remington, Fulkus, and Erika. Meanwhile, his own friends, having been freed by Sylvie, watch his back, and Theon understands how they got there, but the white-haired man reminds him that wanting to save a comrade in danger is only natural, or at least that's what he would do. For their part, Fulcus and Erica are excited, revealing they saw everything that just happened, and Sylvie insists they will always be on his side. As for the enemies, Remington reminds them that exam supervisors shouldn't intervene, much less try to kill a candidate, which is considered an extremely serious crime. Seeing they're surrounded, the men start to panic, asking Liam what on earth they should do. The problem is that Liam just stands there, thinking he's ruined. They didn't find anything out about the artifact. Axion is dead, Theo is still alive, and to top it off, a bunch of brats have discovered them. There is literally no way for them to get away with this, so seeing the panic in his men, he gives a drastic order. Kill them all. It sounds like madness until he explains that they will pass it off as a tragic accident where dozens of abnormal monsters appeared out of nowhere, wiping out all the candidates. And the best part is, they have the means to do it. With that, they release bags containing 20 magic spheres, the equivalent of 20 level 5 monsters, more than enough to kill them and erase all proof of the Troybon family's involvement. With that in mind, he throws the spheres toward the group, but he doesn't get to celebrate because a hooded figure suddenly appears behind him and stabs him, asking what the hell is going on there. Of course, this new hooded figure didn't arrive alone. These are the real test supervisors, at least the ones who weren't bought by Ed, Safar Gardner, Aaron Barkus, Natasha Kolb, and Sally Gardner. They watch Liam's lifeless body fall like a piece of trash and move toward the other traitors, warning them that if they don't want to end up like him, they should shut up and follow without protest. At this point, it's obvious they're completely surrounded, and while there's doubt about how the supervisors found out what was happening, the answer arrives when Theo collapses from exhaustion and Ray appears to catch him. He thanks her for getting help, and right then, the real supervisors start taking the infiltrators away. Remington yells that he should have called him when it all started, and Julkus says he can't die before they face off again. Erika tells him not to forget that she helped him, and his friends start crying, moved that he did all of this to save them. In response, Theo just leans a bit more onto Ray's shoulder, and smiling, he admits that this is what he's always wanted. This is his strength. And although his words move the girl, the idiot ruins the moment by asking her to bring him some wine, because he's definitely going to take first place in the test. On the other hand, things take a drastic turn at the council offices when the messenger announces that Axion is dead. However, all we see is his shocked face. We don't know what he'll do next, from now on. Following that, the second stage concludes, and all the candidates gather in the middle of the forest with Pharrell Ragnar, one of the 9 dragons. This is a huge surprise, as he's known for almost never appearing in public unless it's something of vital importance. He announces that out of the 87 candidates, 45 have passed, which is a much higher percentage than in previous years, proving that this is the strongest generation in history. Not only that, but the first place score is insane. However, he says he'll get into those details later, as he explains that they will be promoted from trainees to entry-level warriors. This means they now have the right to officially act as warriors under the Ragnar name. With that, he announces the scores, where Theo Ragnar stands out in first place with 1,121 points, earned after taking down Action Ragnar. In second place is Remington with 926 points, and in third is Erica with 843 points. They are followed by Ray and Julkos in fourth and fifth. But the important moment comes when Farrell explains that the ceremony isn't over yet, as there is a third phase that only a handful of them will be able to complete. Why? Because he then asks those who have earned the right to raise their hands, which sparks a wave of confusion among everyone, until Remington, Erica, Ray, and our protagonist raise their hands. This reveals that the hidden objective of the second phase was to awaken the elemental breathing method. To do this, they had to collect certain bells with magic inscriptions and learn them. This would allow them to give an attribute to their magic and advance to the third and final phase. Of course, Theo wasn't able to understand the instructions in his past life. However, thanks to one of the spells from the grimoire, he was able to visualize the essence of the inscriptions as if they were images in his mind, understanding everything behind them in an instant. In fact, Peril mentions that he only expected one of them to succeed, which makes sense, considering Theo remembers that only Erica was able to do it in his past life. This means Ray and Remington are getting even stronger, and now they must step forward to show the attributes they obtained. Our protagonist is first thinking that Axion's death will trigger many unexpected changes. However, there's nothing to fear, because this future will be much better than before. To make it even clearer, he reveals that the attribute he obtained is lightning, and thanks to that, he can assign those properties to his mana, manifesting it in the form of a giant bolt of lightning that strikes behind him. That process is followed by control, expansion, and finally the magic sword. But although it's already impressive that he can manifest it, Theo decides to go a step further and activate the dragon heart inside him, entering the control phase, which allows him to create a sphere of pure electric power. Ray is instantly starstruck, Erica sees him as a perfect rival, and Perel praises him, making it clear that they are a stronger generation. However, Theo isn't satisfied with just that, and concentrates a bit more to activate the elemental breathing method of lightning, so that with a simple strike from his sword, the form of an electric dragon appears, entering what is known as the expansion phase. What amazes everyone most is that Theo isn't afraid to aim that dragon directly at Parel, who receives it with a smile, and using only his hands activates the water-breathing method, creating a slash of oceanic pressure that cancels it out instantly. The old man is so impressed that he even decides to award him 1,000 additional points for his effort, leaving him with 2,121 total points in the second stage, a number not seen since the prodigy Torkel. After that, it's everyone else's turn, and Remington gets 500 extra points for reaching the water element control phase. Ray gets 300 for her ice manifestation, as does Erika for her fire manifestation. Because of this, the three of them end up with over 1,000 points each, making them top-tier candidates. And with that, the second phase finally comes to an end, so everyone else must go prepare for the nomination ceremony in a week, while the 4 candidates for the third stage stay behind so he can explain what's next. The problem is, as soon as he speaks, a powerful dark energy emerges from the mountaintops, creating bursts of power so sudden that it feels like an earthquake, and they nearly fall to the ground in a mix of surprise and fear. Interestingly, Perrin doesn't even react. He simply asks if they're ready to begin the third stage. Theo recognizes the energy as Lord Brock's power, and remembers that according to clan rules, this stage is called the meeting with the head of the family. However, it doesn't mean they'll meet him directly. Instead, the leader decides what they must do. Depending on their performance, they'll earn a nomination to compete for the title of family head. For a descendant, this means being recognized alongside the 5 other great descendants as a leading candidate for the succession. Theo's logic tells him that his father is waiting for him on the mountain, but Brock's energy is unmistakable. He wonders if his companion's heart is there, and his fears are confirmed when Parel explains that the test involves pushing through the dragon's fear to meet the head of the family. It would sound easy if the energy weren't so powerful that it's physically paralyzing, and Theo, who has dealt with this before, advises them not to resist with brute force, but to adjust their magic frequency instead. It's a bit complicated to understand, but basically the point of the test is that if they can't control and adjust their magic properly, they have no right to face the leader. Luckily, Erika is just as confused as I am, so Remington gives a long explanation, basically saying they have to generate an opposing magic frequency to counter the pressure of the fear. However, it's much easier said than done. They discuss it for a bit longer, while Theo concentrates, and within seconds he covers his body with his new type of energy, allowing him to stand up. Naturally, everyone is amazed, but he insists that if he wants to be the next head of the family, this is the bare minimum, which sparks a sense of competition in the others. Without another word, he heads off, and Par tells the others they should hurry up too, since the evaluation is based on their arrival order. Thanks to that extra motivation, the group manages to do it and starts moving immediately, leaving Par feeling like it might be time to take on a disciple. Meanwhile, at Camellia Palace, Curson runs through the hallways like a madman looking for Cecilia, overjoyed because they're about to become incredibly rich. Ever since Theo became famous in the first phase of the ceremony, the workshop hasn't stopped receiving orders, practically reviving the business. And while Cecilia is happy for Theo, she can't help but worry about her son. The more he stands out, the greater the dangers become, and she feels like there is less and less she can do for him. Her only comfort is being able to make him clothes so he looks his best. Or so she thinks, because then Evelyn remembers something and asks her mother if she has ever made a prosthetic. Meanwhile, Kyle receives a report that Theo was the first to advance, and especially about that impressive speech he gave about becoming the next head of the family. The interesting thing here is that the person he said this to is none other than Robert, who is worried that such ambition almost always leads to the same outcome. Kyle agrees but insists that they also went through that phase, and the proof of that is right here in the Sword Cemetery. He also tells him not to worry, as he is currently working on bringing back the golden age of the Ragnars. If anything gets in his way, he'll simply eliminate it, just as he did with all these fallen warriors. In the meantime, he'll just keep a close eye on his interesting son, who definitely seems to be a regressor after all. The scene shifts to Kyle himself welcoming Theo at the summit, first with a smile, and then with a defiant gaze that matches the heavy aura surrounding him. Seeing him in person, our protagonist realizes it took him 4 hours instead of the planned one. The pressure is incredibly overwhelming, and then his father asks if he knows what this place is. Theo explains that it's the Sword Cemetery, where the weapons of everyone the family head has personally defeated so far are laid to rest. His father uses that as a starting point to make it clear that being the clan leader is about more than just giving orders. It's about handling enemies alone without relying on anyone. So, he asks Theo if he truly believes he has what it takes to hold that position. Theo immediately says yes, but his father insists it's not that simple, as it also means carrying the resentment of thousands of souls and entire generations who will hunt him for revenge. Even so, Theo says his determination won't change. When asked why, his first thought is his need for revenge for what happened in his past life. However, he knows that's not the answer his father expects, so he tells him he will give his answer with his sword. That turns out to be the right answer, and his father stands up, excited to see what Brock taught him. That's right, he already knows about his encounter with the dragon. However, the surprise of those words is nothing compared to what happens next. With a single movement, his father cuts him in half, and in a matter of seconds, Theo realizes he has died. Or at least that's how it feels from his perspective, because it turns out his father used an object called the heart sword, which forces you to undergo both a physical and spiritual death. Only those with a strong will can return from it. In short, if his determination isn't strong enough, he'll die. But Kyle is concerned as he doesn't need a regressor who uses their second chance only to become a burden. Meanwhile, our protagonist's consciousness falls into a void where he realizes he's dead. This was to be expected when fighting his father. The strange thing is that even there, he feels no regret. He took over Camellia Palace and killed Rendon and Axion. He took every opportunity he had. That thought is liberating, so much so that dozens of hands gradually begin to drag his consciousness into the infinite void, repeating that it's time to retire and rest in peace. And for a moment, it seems that's the end of it, since he has nothing left to hold on to. But in that moment, the bird appears before him, telling him it's time to stop the drama and start fighting. And thanks to that, the tiny bit of consciousness he had left, which was almost about to vanish, takes physical form once again. In a matter of seconds, he becomes Theo again, with his sword in hand. With a single thought, he decides he can't let things end like this. He made a promise, vowing that this life would be different, and even if he's broken, he'll never give up. So, he uses his sword to make a massive slash through the void, breaking the effect of the heart sword. This brings him back with his body intact, where he's greeted by his father, who smiles and says he has passed the test. Then we move straight to the day of the designation ceremony, where poor Holkus is incredibly nervous, since they're being watched by the leader, the 9 dragons, and the clan's most important heroes. Erika tells him he shouldn't worry, because no one is going to be interested in a weakling like him, and they spend a bit more time arguing, because she refuses to tell him how the 3rd stage went for her. Interestingly, the topic comes up that as members of the Lanky clan, their lives will always be tied to the Ragnars. Specifically, it's said that sooner or later, he'll have to risk his life for a Ragnar family member, and if so, Holkus prefers it to be someone strong and extraordinary like Theo. That's why the idiot starts referring to the protagonist as my Theo or our Theo, declaring that his plan from now on is to follow him wherever he goes. This leaves Erika thinking for a moment until they announce that the designation ceremony is about to begin. Based on the scores, the first on the list is Theo Ragnar, so he steps forward in the cool new outfit his mom made him, enjoying the curious looks from the crowd but especially the cheers from all his companions. From a distance, Evelyn thinks she couldn't be prouder and wonders which squad he plans to join. She thinks it would be great if he chose the White Dragon squad, but she thinks it might be too much to ask for everything to be so perfect. Then the judge mentions how impressive it was to see him excel in every area. However, just as he was about to proceed, something unexpected happens. Ed stands up dramatically, catching everyone's attention. The worst part is that he doesn't even say a word, so the judge tells him to take a seat so the ceremony can continue, until Ed smiles and begins to speak, mentioning that he has decided to offer him the position of Deputy Director of the Central Security Office. Of course, Theo doesn't understand any of it because coming in first place has a very special meaning. It represents the rise of someone who, despite being part of the Ragnar family, had been crawling through the lowest levels of everyone else, only to soar through the skies and make his name resonate with respect among the people. Additionally, the number of people who admire him increased, replacing looks of contempt with a level of amazement that cancels out the horrible past of that Ragnar outcast, destined for failure. And as a reward for successfully completing the mission, the system announces that he has obtained an ether core. It's a very rare item that our protagonist doesn't even know how to make or what it's used for. However, that's when we return to Ed's bold declarations, whose fake smile sets off all of Theo's alarms. Theo uses his observation skill to see that the villain's talents are nothing more than cunning, manipulation, and ambition. Furthermore, the guy is certain he has him under control, and he's so desperate to discover the secrets behind the artifacts that Axiom's death won't stop him from moving forward. To this, Theo only thinks that he won't let him get away with it, and he'll take it upon himself to destroy both him and the Troivans. Luckily, Julius dares to say what everyone is thinking, that he surely wants revenge for the death of his nephew, but Ed just plays dumb, insisting he only wants to recruit an exceptional talent. At that point, the judge tells him he'll have his chance to speak later, and asks the protagonist if he's made a decision yet, to which he replies that he'd first like to hear the proposals from everyone interested. In case it wasn't clear, this is where he has to decide which division or team he will join. Osa doesn't hesitate to raise her hand, offering him a position as her disciple and the title of Young Master of the Flower Palace. Considering she has no children, she would make him her adopted son and heir. Hearing such an offer, Erika thinks that the others won't even want to open their mouths. But this is only the beginning, as a voice declares that they also want to join the dispute. From one second to the next, the crow that had been watching everything descends in the form of a powerful bolt of lightning, taking the true form of Robert Ragnar, known as the Black Dragon and leader of the Black Snow Intelligence Agency. He mentions that he's been watching him throughout the ceremony, and he could confirm that Kyle was right to label him as, and he was able to confirm that Kyle was right to label him that way. He is an interesting prospect, so he asks him to join Black Snow with Musil, the highest rank in the entire organization that only a handful of people possess, allowing them to maintain their identity and gain honor. In his past life, aspiring to such a thing would have been impossible. However, this is still just the beginning, because Mesoparel tells him that the gates of the Tower of the Rising Dragon are also open to him, making him the fourth of the 9 dragons to offer him a spot. Of course, there's still Julius, who is oddly much quieter than usual, and acting like a spoiled brat at the competition, saying he's welcome to join the White Armored Dragon Knights, but without any special benefits. From a distance, Evelyn thinks that's exactly what she expected of him. Even though she wants him to join with all her might, she doesn't want to be unfair to the other members, so the only thing she can offer is total support and the pride of being a Dragon Knight. After hearing all the offers, Teo is ready to announce his choice, but he is interrupted by a voice in his head. "You're a regressor, aren't you?" Teo tracks the voice to Hilda Ragnar, the former head of the family. He automatically replies that he doesn't know what she's talking about, but she doesn't listen. Instead, she congratulates him on his performance and mentions she doesn't know what his first cycle was like. That word makes him realize there are people who have returned more than once, while to everyone else he just looks like a crazy guy overthinking his choice. Hilda continues revealing that she is also a regressor, and that her assigned cycle has already ended. This sends him into a spiral of endless questions, and he finally decides to be direct and ask her what she means by cycles, at which point she realizes he really doesn't know anything, and that Kyle hasn't explained what's actually happening at all. However, she isn't surprised, as she reveals that Kyle hates regressors, and it's strange that he left him alive. She insists that if he wants to know the secrets of this world and the family, he can go find her. After that, he's paralyzed and starts connecting the dots. His father's harsh trials, the few clues he gave him during the last test, and the fact that he possesses Brock's heart. Generally, a human defeating such an ancient dragon would be unthinkable, but if it's the leader who is known as a demigod, it might be possible. In the end, it's clear to him that if he wants to discover the family's secret regarding regressors, he must go to Hilda, and with that in mind, he gives his answer. This remains a mystery to us for now, as we then see Remington announce that he will join the Tower of the Rising Dragon with Peril. This is a very different decision from his past life, where Teo remembers that he returned to the Narcio family after the ceremony and trained there. He gained great power and eventually rebelled against the Ragnar clan in an unprecedented war. The fact that he decided to join Perel means the future will change in ways he can't even predict, staying on the side of the family and the protagonist. Because of this, they say goodbye, promising to meet again in a year. Later, once both of them have become truly strong, the same applies to the rest of his friends. Ray decides to return to the Spiritual Cultivation Palace where his mother lives to continue training on his own, while Sybil and the boys from the 4th training camp hope to stay with the protagonist, but they aren't strong enough to be selected. At that moment, the judge announces that the ceremony is finally over. Although it's a shame to have to part ways with his friends, Theo is sure that everyone will give their best in their respective places. Besides, it seems he won't be alone either, as Holkis and Erica approach him claiming that they also coincidentally decided to follow the same path as him. It's clear they've chosen which Ragnar to follow from now on. Although they both try to hide their excitement, mentally, they are dazed thinking about how strong he is. Holkis can't stop seeing him as his rival, and Erica, well, let's just say she has other things on her mind. Just then, a blonde guy tells them to pay attention because the captain has arrived. Theo reflects that his choice remains the same as it was at the beginning. To join the most honorable group in the entire Ragnar clan, the perfect place to become the family head, the White Armored Dragon Cavalry. This means his meeting with Hilda will have to wait, as Julius approaches them with a challenging look, asking him and the other rookies what their aspirations are. Holkis shouts that he wants to become a great Dragon Knight. Another guy wants his name to be known everywhere. Erica aims to become the strongest of her generation. Another bald recruit wants to fight with honor, and Theo thinks about wanting to be prepared for the war 5 years from now. So his goal is to become the captain of the White Dragons within 5 years. Of course, that's a bold goal to state in front of Julius, the current captain, but the captain just smiles and gives them a warm welcome, mentioning that regardless of why they came, they must remember that every drop of sweat and blood they shed is worth it. Today's suffering will be tomorrow's pride, and they can be sure they'll always have a comrade watching their backs on this long but fun path to honor. Finally, he tells them that he welcomes them to his great family. A second later, a giant dragon lands behind him, and he introduces them to Gula, his partner, one of the many noble dragons they will get to know from now on, as they are the symbol of the White Dragon Knights. Alongside Gula, 3 more dragons arrive, ridden by those who will be their superiors. He tells them to climb on so they can start the induction ceremony, find their future partners, and then says he'll be waiting for them at the nest before leaving them confused, impressed, and excited, because it means each one of them will have their own dragon. Best of all, among the superiors who came to get them, is none other than that Evelyn ultimately decided to rejoin the cavalry. Not only that, but she now sports an incredible prosthetic arm that allows her to be the unstoppable warrior she once was. Naturally, this was given to her by Cecilia, who visited the 4th training camp personally to thank her for everything she's done for her son. Although Evelyn insisted Teo's achievements were just a reflection of his own talent, Cecilia didn't quite agree. She believes having someone to support and truly recognize you is more important than anyone realizes, and Evelyn has been that person for her little boy. When Evelyn tries to downplay her impact, Cecilia tells her she isn't exaggerating. She has literally been a light on his path, and Cecilia is here to ensure that light can continue to illuminate a wider and more beautiful world than anyone could imagine. In the present, those words translate into a fresh start. On the way to the base, Evelyn thanks Teo for helping her take back the reins and return to the cavalry. From her words, Teo realizes his mother did everything in secret, giving him the credit while following the same advice his teacher gave him long ago. He says nothing and simply offers a silent thanks, while Evelyn assures him she will swear loyalty as his protector. She tells him he can count on her, and they finally arrive at the White Dragon's Nest, a rocky mountain range that serves as the natural habitat for flying dragons. This is where the induction ceremony is held, where the new recruits are chosen by the companions who will be by their side for the following years. This means if they don't find a dragon that chooses to join them, they're out. O wonders if those idiots Hulkus and Erica will be okay. Evelyn takes him for a walk around the area, explaining that when he finds his dragon, he'll feel a connection so strong that he'll immediately know it's the right one. They see various types like the Tyrant Dragon, a 15-meter giant, the Aviali, a long, agile dragon capable of spreading poisonous mist in the air, the Sigia, a dragon that usually hides underground, and the Velociraptor, a small but very fast dragon. However, Teo doesn't feel any kind of attraction or connection to any of them because he already has a specific dragon in mind. It turns out that 6 years after the Great War, rumors began to circulate about a mutant dragon that suddenly attacked the White Dragon's Nest, wiping out all the cavalry specimens that they had painstakingly raised for decades, as well as reducing over 8 nearby villages to ashes. That mysterious and bloodthirsty dragon became known as the Spectral Dragon, a category never seen before with the ability to hide in shadows. After that, it was classified as a level 2 disaster beast with an extermination order, and it could only be eliminated when Oz and Julius joined forces to work together. Teo can't help but think that he needs a dragon just like that as his companion. Meanwhile, Julius watches everything calmly from a distance when Oz approaches him, mentioning that he looks happy about ending up with our protagonist. Julius doesn't deny it, and Oz mentions she already knows what he has planned for Teo, wanting to turn him into the central pillar of the unit because he is planning something very, very big. In response, Julius remains silent, letting her believe or assume whatever she wants, as he reveals he has come to make her a proposal for the boy's sake. Technically, she can't ask him to join the Flower Palace, because the decision of which path to take is entirely his. However, she has something much more interesting in mind. Joint training between her and the cavalry. That takes Julius by surprise. But before hearing his answer, we go back to the protagonist, who finds a group of dragons bullying a white and blue dragon. Evelyn quickly rushes in to help it, as this isn't the first time this has happened. It turns out that Little Dragon has been rejected his whole life because he is actually a hybrid between a female dragon and a male viper, a level 1 beast from the Demon Sea territory. It's a mix that shouldn't even be possible, but there he is, and as those responsible for the dragons, they've done their best to help him. The thing is, level 1 beasts are considered natural disasters so destructive that if even one crossed the Great Wall, the loss of human life would be incalculable. Worse yet, among level 1 beasts, vipers are the strongest, which means that Little Dragon must be the special dragon he's looking for, and his special powers come from his viper side. Evelyn explains that they want to support him, but it's difficult since the other dragons don't recognize him as one of their own, something the protagonist identifies with so much that he has another reason to choose him. His name is Umbra, and with that in mind, he jumps off the dragon, claiming he has found his partner, someone he plans to give a chance at a better life, just like himself. Ao descends at full speed in a freefall, and although he doesn't seem to have a plan, he shows off one of his new tricks. In a matter of seconds, he uses his inventory to summon a dozen swords, which he controls with telekinesis, holding them in the air and stepping on them as if they were a staircase. In the distance, Evelyn wonders when on Earth he learned telekinesis. But that's not even the most impressive part, as his absurd growth rate is only matched by his boldness, approaching Umbra with a determined look and a big smile, as if they were lifelong friends. However, his thoughts aren't so positive. Seeing the dragon cornered, he can only think of the humiliation he lived through every day in his previous life, a nightmare he wouldn't wish on anyone. So without saying a word, he takes those same swords and charges them with electrical energy, hurling them across the area like actual lightning bolts striking the ground. Thanks to that, he manages to scare away the dragons, and only Umbra remains, clearly confused by what is happening. Theo realizes he's the bravest one there and approaches him, asking if he's okay. But unfortunately, Umbra is unable to trust anyone, and after growling at him, he flies away at full speed. That's why Evelyn suggests he should try again later once he's calmed down. However, he responds that now is when the dragon needs him most. There's a reason he keeps pacing the nest even though everyone has rejected him. He's completely alone and just longing for someone who can understand him and accept him as family. With that in mind, he asks Evelyn to follow him, and that's how they end up reaching a more secluded area where she warns him that many have tried to tame him without success. Still, Theo says he can do it and only asks her to help him by bringing some food. After all, this is his initiation ceremony, and he can't leave without trying first. The problem is that poor Umbra is so distrustful that he greets him by activating his fear aura, which Theo answers with his own technique. First, he lets him know that it's nothing compared to Brock's fear aura. Then he presses him with so much offensive energy that Umbra starts to feel increasingly backed into a corner. However, what the little dragon didn't expect is that in a matter of seconds, Theo appears beside him and without warning, pours a healing potion over his wounds, instantly relieving his pain and turning him into a docile little ball that looks at him with eyes full of confusion. That being said, once he picks him up, things get interesting because thanks to the dragon's heart, Theo is able to feel all of Umbra's emotions. The anger toward those who marginalized him, the sadness of wanting to be with them, and an extreme loneliness from spending so much time alone. And now there's hope, because although it seems suspicious that he appeared out of nowhere offering warmth, he can't help but feel a deep desire for him not to leave. So Theo pets his head, letting him know he has nothing to worry about since he won't turn his back on him, and he even gives him a small gift, a collar made of precious gems. He tells him that if he decides to become his partner, this will be only the first of many. And that's how Theo's strategy of bribing him works, because he makes it clear that even though he knows he doesn't like reins or saddles, he can make him one decorated with jewels that will make him the envy of the entire nest. At that moment, Theo thinks she sounds like his grandmother, which makes the elf sneeze with the feeling that someone is about to make her lose a lot of money. Anyway, the point is that the strategy works, and with a small cry, Umbra accepts him as his owner, at which point the system announces he has obtained the skill of Dragon Tamer. This means that the more trust he builds with them, the easier it will be to tame others in the future. And so, when Evelyn returns with 2 oxen, she finds them cuddling as if they've known each other forever. She can't believe he's actually won the trust of the most difficult dragon in the entire nest. After that, Umbra feasts, and the protagonist explains it wasn't that hard, he just offered comfort for its physical and emotional wounds, along with a small gift to show he cares and sees it as an equal. Poor Umbra is so adorable that it even offers him a piece of its dinner. Seeing them interact makes Evelyn realize it's not actually surprising that he won its trust after all. That's Theo for you, but her smile fades when she sees him climbing onto Umbra's back. The little dragon lets him ride even without reins or a saddle, and despite neither of them having had flight training even once in their lives. However, despite her warnings, Theo tells her he has it under control and takes off, activating his Dragon Tamer skill, which also helps compensate for his lack of riding technique. Once in the air, the two of them speed away. Interestingly, instead of just flying around, Umbra tells him there's a place he wants to show him, moving forward with an innocent smile that makes the protagonist wonder how such a docile little thing ended up becoming the terrifying spectral dragon. Unfortunately, these questions keep him from noticing what is happening around them. As the peace of one of the waterfalls sets in, a surge of extremely dark energy begins to emerge. Meanwhile, they traverse every corner of the white dragon's nest until they reach a sort of cave that even the protagonist, with all his experience in black snow in his previous life, never knew about. The place is full of precious crystals, proof that Umbra really likes shiny things. However, at that moment, the protagonist notices 3 plants, and just by looking at them, he understands how the creature ended up becoming the spectral dragon in the first place. It turns out it has been eating ghost herbs, which are loaded with demonic energy. What's strange is that these usually only grow in the darkest depths of the demonic sea, and they're so dangerous that it's best to burn them while trying not to ruin his precious crystals. However, everything changes when at the back of the cave, he finds the body of a man in chains who seems to have been dead for at least 10 years. Surprisingly, his body is hardly decomposed, which usually means his magic energy level was incredible. So he wonders how a master of that caliber ended up there in the first place, and naturally, he has to investigate. But everything goes to hell when, as he turns him over, something ignites inside the corpse. Suddenly, it screams the name Kyle while opening its mouth as if preparing a powerful attack. Fortunately, Umbra intervenes just in time, pinning him against the wall, but the dead man doesn't give up and tries to bite the little dragon. Theo puts his arm in the way to take the full force of the attack, and then the man screams Kyle's name again along with Robert's, insisting he can't forgive them. This leaves Theo paralyzed, wondering what on earth his father has to do with this. Luckily, while all of this was happening, Evelyn had been following us and shows up just in time. Before he can lose his arm, she forces the corpse to let go, sending Theo falling to the ground. He's bleeding heavily and writhing in pain, as that wasn't just any ordinary bite. It was an attack from a poisonous corpse filled with demonic energy, so he needs an antidote immediately. Without wasting a second, Evelyn tries to carry him back to the base, but Umbra pounces on her as if she were a threat, or perhaps he doesn't understand she's just trying to help. At that moment, Theo regains consciousness and asks Umbra if he has a better idea. The dragon responds with such enthusiasm that Theo decides to trust him with his life. As expected, Evelyn doesn't agree with this, but our protagonist tells her that even with proper treatment, the survival rate for this poison is less than 30%. Since he might die anyway, it's better to trust Umbra, who likely has experience dealing with that corpse in the past. With that in mind, he asks her to trust the dragon, and the little guy gets to work, gathering pieces of crystals and spectral herbs. He then gestures for Evelyn to mix them together and give them to the young master. Despite her doubts, she obeys and uses her magic to conjure a potion, pouring it into Theo's mouth. At first, nothing happens, but after a few seconds, the mixture begins to react with the dragon heart inside him, generating a surge of magical energy that heals his body. However, the show isn't over yet, as his elemental magic also begins to emerge, shifting from a bright electric yellow to a deep pitch black that illuminates the entire cave. The energy then flows back into Theo's body, starting a process the system calls metamorphosis, as he begins to take on the characteristics of a spectral dragon. Meanwhile, in Julius's office, one of his men delivers news that leaves him completely paralyzed. He asks if this has been confirmed by the Black Snow Scouts, and the man says yes, adding there's an 89% chance it's true. Julius immediately smashes his desk in a fit of rage. It's insane. No one could have imagined something like this would happen. His cavalry's 5th squad, consisting of the leader Tyner and 15 external members, has completely disappeared. We then learn that body renewal is an ancient technique that allows one to expel waste from the body and transform their physical constitution to make it easier to accumulate magical energy. However, the process usually takes a full week, interrupted suffering, and it has only proven effective when the target is a child under 5 years old. This means the mere fact that it worked shows that Theo has extraordinary, incomparable luck, resulting from several coincidences such as the poison inside his body, the immense amount of magic energy dissolved in that same poison, the spiritual energy accumulated in the cave, and Umbra's help, who discovered a method to detoxify the poison. All these elements balanced out in a mysterious way, allowing his body to release the poison while simultaneously absorbing the mystical power within it, so that in a matter of minutes, he wakes up and apologizes to both of them for worrying them like that. He then notices that he has a new talent in his stats, the power of the spectral dragon. He must be very careful with this, as if it isn't handled properly, he could end up with the same fate as Umbra in the other timeline. Besides that, he gained a lot of additional stats from the cave crystals, which aren't just pretty and bright, but contain high concentrations of pure energy. In this case, they acted as a kind of medicine, saving him and boosting his growth in a way he never could have imagined. However, Theo admits there's a much more important matter to handle, finding out who the hell that corpse is. Apparently, it won't be that difficult because they find a series of letters carved into the wall, forming a diary written by the man himself. It begins by explaining that after being defeated by Kyle and Robert Ragnar, he decided to take refuge there to plan his revenge. That explains why he shouted their names before attacking our protagonist. He goes on to say his body was deteriorating rapidly from a wound Robert inflicted on his mana core. Still, he was so desperate to survive that he began eating the spectral grass to avoid starvation, but it only caused him to lose his mind due to the plant's demonic influence, leading to uncontrollable periods of rage, and in that state revenge was impossible. So he decided to melt down his precious sword, the rock sword, and use it to seal himself away, hoping that whoever found him in the future would defeat the scoundrels who led him to his death. And that's where things get interesting, as Theo and Evelyn recognize the name of that sword, for it belongs to a legendary warrior who could control the wind at will, and who over 40 years ago competed against Kyle for the throne, the tragic hero Hector Ragnar. Upon realizing this, she doesn't hesitate to kneel. Dead or not, he is still a legitimate Ragnar heir, and she insists she deserves punishment for attacking him. But Theo tells her to stop being ridiculous, as she did it to save him, and neither will speak of what happened in this cave. Additionally, he wants her to keep Hector's vision written on the walls, an absolute technique that rivals that of the 9 dragons. She immediately refuses, saying she doesn't deserve such an honor. But Theo insists she should become Hector's successor, grow stronger, and carry on his legacy. It sounds crazy, but Hector's writings on the walls make it clear he didn't want his technique to be lost to time. Someone must fulfill the promise and to follow in that venerable master's footsteps. And who better than her, since she promised she would become stronger to follow and serve him. And thanks to that little reminder, Evelyn accepts, kneeling before the protagonist so he can officially name her as his knight. Theo goes along with it, taking her as his first blade on this long journey they will embark on together toward the throne of the Ragnar family. Meanwhile, back at the cavalry headquarters, Holku mocks the protagonist for not being able to tame a dragon yet, mentioning that maybe he isn't so talented after all. However, when he sees Theo arrive with Umbra, his smile vanishes, while the veterans begin to whisper among themselves, unable to believe that someone was actually able to tame that lone wolf. Despite everyone's questions, Evelyn ignores them. She is ready to give her report to Julius, but that's when she finds out that he rushed to his office a while ago because of an urgent message. Everyone immediately gets a very bad feeling, which is confirmed when Julius and his dragon land right behind them, apologizing for having to welcome them this way, but he has no other choice. Everyone present must prepare to depart for the White Fortress on their first mission. A mission that doesn't surprise the protagonist as he already knows what it's about. A hostage incident in the Ceres caverns to steal the dragon-slaying sword, cutting wind, all of this is the start of a rebellion organized by Ed Troybon. Clearly, the others have no idea what's coming, and one of the veterans asks what could be so urgent that rookies who were just selected are being sent to the battlefield. Julius decides to be honest, revealing that the leader of Team 5 trainer and his 14 subordinates have disappeared. And that truly takes the protagonist by surprise, as not only have things happened very differently from the other timeline, but Trainer is one of the strongest and most respected veterans in the cavalry, someone who would never go down without a fight. Julius continues, explaining that the Black Snow estimates an 89% chance of death, but even if they are miraculously alive, they won't be able to continue the mission, so they will form a temporary team to finish what the others couldn't. And the new leader will be Evelyn, and they depart in 3 days, so they have 72 hours to finish their training and head out to avenge their comrades. Meanwhile, the protagonist remembers that in the other timeline, that hostage incident by the Black Skeleton bandit gang was an event resolved with no casualties thanks to the cavalry's efforts, or so it seemed, because the true purpose was to steal the cutting wind sword. So Ed could start his rebellion. The fact that they've kidnapped Team 5 means things will take a much more violent turn caused by all the changes he's made since his regression. So, the protagonist thinks he must take care of resolving this personally. And so naturally, the system agrees, assigning him the mission to go retrieve the sword. 3 days later, at a fortress nestled in the mountains, one of the guards is the first to notice dozens of flying dragons approaching in the distance. This can only mean one thing. They are under attack by the white-armored dragon cavalry. He immediately shouts for his comrades to sound the alarm, but it is too late. Within seconds, the tower is blown to pieces as Evelyn gives the order to drop every single bomb. In desperation, the bandits try to take cover inside the fortress to avoid a head-on battle. However, it is too late for that. Evelyn and the others leave their dragons behind to completely surround them. With a single command, they subdue them all. They will show them the price for messing with the wrong people. The problem is that all of this might be for nothing. In the distance, as the castle is reduced to ashes, one of the enemies escapes through the forest with the famous sword in his hands. The poor guy knows that if they had arrived any sooner, he would be in trouble. But he doesn't realize his fate is already sealed, as a mysterious hooded figure suddenly takes his life. It is clear that these are the ones who hired the bandits in the first place. And now that they have the sword secured, they can move forward with the rest of their operation. Meanwhile, back at the fortress, the group manages to take down every last bandit. They do it with such ease that our protagonist can't help but feel suspicious. Besides, it is very strange that Squad 5 was wiped out by such rookies. Not only that, but by using his memory-reading ability, he realizes that none of the bandits present have any memory of even seeing the sword, not even the high-ranking ones. In other words, there is something they are overlooking. One of the veterans notices his nervousness and asks if there's a problem, but she eventually assumes he is just on edge and tells him it is time to rejoin the main group. However, everything changes when the blonde mentions a strong smell of gunpowder. That seemingly small detail clicks in the protagonist's mind. He smashes one of the fortress walls, revealing that the place is packed with explosives. The villains use those useless bandits as bait to set a trap. Without wasting a second, he yells that they need to leave immediately, but it is too late. Just then, a cannonball lands behind them. Even though Teo tries to shout for everyone to get down, the impact is immediate, and the place explodes into the air. Naturally, those cannonballs were fired to trigger the trap by the hooded figures in the forest. They continue to fire relentlessly, while their leader watches on. That they must exterminate every last ant without leaving a trace. For the sake of that person, Aimi, who back at the palace, holds the lifeless body of Akshan, promising him that she will tear off the head of the miserable person who hurt him. As for Evelyn, she meets up with the rest of the members of the Knighthood elsewhere in the fortress, where after wiping out most of the enemies, she reaches the exact same conclusion as the protagonist. There's no way Tyner and Team 5 were defeated by those useless fools. There has to be something else, something they are overlooking. However, it's already too late, because at that moment, explosions begin, and she has to witness firsthand as one of her men takes a direct hit from one of the cannonballs flying through the air in a truly disturbing scene. And after a short while, Theo and the others reach the wing where she is located. The orders are the same, they must leave as soon as possible, and the protagonist suggests going to the outer wall, away from the bombardment. At first, that sounds like a good option, until the system announces that they must open the gates of the brain, which we could interpret as a warning for him not to be stupid, but it actually goes much further, as it displays a kind of general map of the fortress, so detailed that for a moment he is completely paralyzed. Without wasting time, Evelyn tries to grab him by the arm to drag him with her to the exit. However, Theo doesn't move, and with a serious look, he tells her no. What they must do is go inside the palace, and though it sounds crazy, she has already learned to go along with him in moments like this. So they follow him inside, making it clear that their lives are in his hands. Meanwhile, Theo explains that if they leave, the villains will already be waiting in ambush, and by reading the memories carved into the walls, he understands the culprits were certain no one could survive inside the castle. Generally, they're right, but what isn't said out loud is that thanks to this new ability, where he can see the structural strengths and weaknesses, he is able to perfectly identify where to hide so they can get out intact. To the left, there are buried explosives, and from the right, projectiles are coming. So he determines that the safest route is to head down the front stairs, which works until continuing down that same hallway, he comes face to face with a wall, a dead end. Everyone immediately panics, and the worst happens when the ceiling above them begins to collapse, burying them under the rubble with no chance of escape. Meanwhile, in the forest, the hooded figures watch the flames spread through every corner of the fortress, and one of them informs their leader that they have used every single projectile, so there's no way anyone is getting out alive. This seems to satisfy the man, who reminds him that this is for young Axion's revenge. He tells them the condition of the bodies doesn't matter, as long as they bring him Teo Ragnar's head. Meanwhile, our protagonist's body has fallen among the rubble, but he isn't dead yet. Even though they were cornered in a dead end, they found a small hatch that led to a basement just in time. However, they are immediately surrounded by bandits from the Black Skeletons once they get there, who had also gone to that place for refuge, and most importantly, the members of Team 5 who had been kidnapped. Without hesitation, they take out the thieves, and Tyner, who has lost a leg, begins to explain everything that happened, including the fact that Intelligence Minister Ragnar is behind it all. This doesn't surprise Evelyn, since an attack of this scale against someone so strong could never have been pulled off without internal help. In short, they are facing an obvious betrayal. The veterans insist on getting revenge, but Tyner argues that the traitors have everything carefully calculated, and acting without a plan could make things even worse. For now, the best move is to inform the Black Snow about what happened so they can send help. To this, Teo mentions that the reinforcements outside have likely already been dealt with, but they shouldn't worry, because there's still a way to win. They have to be the ones to set an ambush when the enemies come to check the bodies later. It was a smart suggestion, making it clear he has already opened his mana channel to his brain, and Tyner can't deny he's right. He almost gave up like a coward, but this strategy will work. So, only one order remains: prepare for combat. Quite a bit of time passes, until, just as Teo predicted, the hooded men arrive at the ruins of the fortress, looking for the bodies. However, they find nothing and begin to panic when they see the place is full of the bandits' bodies, but almost none from the cavalry. The leader asks if they've seen any sign of them, but the answer doesn't come the way he expected. In a matter of seconds, his men are cut down by the boys, and Evelyn herself lunges at him, nearly taking his eye out with her sword. Unfortunately, the man reacts in time to push her away with a kick, shouting at the top of his lungs that they're being ambushed. The problem is that when he looks at his other companions, they are already being brutally wiped out, while Evelyn declares that according to the Ragnar law, she is authorized to execute them immediately for treason. With that said, she lunges at him, starting a series of quick attacks that the man can barely keep up with, as he can't understand how on earth they survived that bombardment. In his mind, they must have used some kind of trick, but that distraction it ends up costing him, as Evelyn is so strong that she forces him back. She makes it clear they already know they're part of the intelligence agency and tells them that resisting is pointless. Luz adds that if they stop fighting, she will spare their lives. However, the real surprise comes when the leader ignores every threat and shouts that he is now authorizing the use of forbidden techniques. Of course, none of the students know what the hell he's talking about until they look back at those who had been pinned down just seconds ago. They find the bodies emitting an absurd energy that can only mean one thing: the reverse blood technique, an ability that consumes one's own life in exchange for power. Thanks to that, one of them manages to send the protagonist flying several meters away with a single blow, and having the advantage, they charge at the group, leaving a trail of blood behind them. Luckily, it's not his blood, but that of a wounded teammate from Team 5 who uses his last bit of strength to tell him to run. But Theo isn't willing to give up so easily and activates his dragon claws. At the same time, he uses a new technique called the lightning circuit, which allows him to perfectly locate every enemy within his range. Then, he launches a devastating attack that takes out every single one of them instantly. In the end, the only one left alive is the leader himself, who can't believe Theo defeated the reverse blood technique